I came home early that Tuesday and heard my mother's voice echoing through my beach house, the one I bought with my own money after my divorce, the one that cost me $2 million and 3 years of healing. "It's perfect for the wedding," she said, her tone casual, entitled. "The family's beach house. Tara owes us that much." I stood frozen outside the dining room door. They were planning my sister Lily's entire wedding at my house, and I wasn't even part of the conversation. When I finally confronted them at dinner a week later, my mother smiled that cold, practiced smile I'd known my entire life. "Don't be selfish, dear. We're family." 200 invitations went out with my address printed on expensive cardstock. A lifestyle magazine featured the Whitman family beach house in their society section. My mother gave interviews about our close-knit family values. I said nothing. I just smiled. And I made one phone call. On the wedding day, my sister stood in her $8,000 dress. Guests filled the beach in designer clothes. Champagne waited on ice, and my mother preened for the cameras she'd invited to document her social triumph. That's when the police cars pulled up. What happened next destroyed my family's reputation, exposed secrets that had been buried for decades, and taught me that sometimes the quietest revenge is the most devastating. But that was just the beginning. Because what I discovered about my sister's fiancé, my mother's lies, and my own past would change everything I thought I knew about the people I called family. This is the story of how I finally stopped being their daughter and started being myself. My name is Tara Whitman. I'm 35 years old, a financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm in Portland, and for the past 3 years, I've been rebuilding a life that fell apart when my marriage ended. The beach house, my sanctuary, my $2 million proof that I could stand on my own, sits 20 minutes outside the city, perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. I bought it with money I'd saved for a decade, renovated it with my own hands on weekends, and filled it with silence that felt like peace after years of noise. It was the first thing in my life that belonged entirely to me, and I protected it the way you protect something you fought to earn. That Tuesday started like any other. I left for work at 7:30, kissed goodbye to the empty house that never judged me, and drove into the city with my travel mug of coffee and a playlist designed to ease me into the day. By 2 o'clock, I was deep in quarterly reports when I realized I'd left the Morrison file, the one I needed for tomorrow's presentation, sitting on my kitchen counter. I told my assistant I'd be back in an hour, grabbed my keys, and made the drive home on autopilot, already mentally rehearsing the presentation I'd give to the senior partners. I pulled into my driveway and noticed my mother's silver Lexus parked near the garage. My stomach tightened reflexively. She had a key to my house, a fact I'd been meaning to change for months, but hadn't gotten around to the way you don't get around to closing doors you're not quite ready to shut. My sister Lily's car sat beside it, a white BMW I recognized from the photos she posted constantly on Instagram. I hadn't known they were coming. They hadn't called. But this was typical. My mother treated my home like an extension of her own, dropping by whenever it suited her, often with an agenda I wouldn't understand until it was too late. I unlocked the front door quietly, not wanting to startle them, already forming the pleasant smile I'd learned to wear around my family. That's when I heard my mother's voice carrying from the dining room, confident and clear. "The beach house is perfect. It's the family's property after all. Tara owes us that much after everything we've done for her." I froze with my hand still on the doorknob. The words hung in the air like smoke, filling my lungs with something acrid and familiar. "I was thinking late September," Lily's voice responded, bright with excitement. "The weather should still be gorgeous, and the light at sunset will be perfect for photos. We could set up the ceremony on the deck overlooking the water reception on the beach with string lights and those elegant white tents. Oh, Mom, it's going to be beautiful." 200 guests, you said. My mother's voice took on the tone she used when planning her charity events, the one that meant she was already picturing herself at the center of attention. "We'll need to hire proper catering. None of that casual beach food. This needs to be elegant. The Whitman name means something in this community, and your wedding will remind everyone of that." I should have walked in. I should have interrupted, demanded to know what they were doing, planning a wedding at my house without asking me. But I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the hardwood floor. I'd refinished myself, my hand frozen on the doorknob I'd chosen because I loved the brushed nickel finish. "What about Tara?" Lily asked, and for a moment I felt a flicker of hope that my sister would be my advocate, would question this insanity. "What about her?" My mother's dismissive tone crushed that hope instantly. "She'll be thrilled to help. She's always complaining about being left out of family events. This way she can contribute something meaningful. Besides, it's not like she's using the house for anything important. She just sits there alone every weekend reading or staring at the ocean. At least this way the house will serve a purpose." My father's voice joined the conversation, quieter but no less complicit. "Margaret's right, sweetheart. Your sister will come around. She always does." I heard Richard, my father, though the title felt increasingly meaningless shift in his chair. I could picture him sitting there, hands folded on my dining table, nodding along to whatever my mother said the way he'd nodded along my entire life. He never stood up to her. He never stood up for me. His silence was its own form of violence, passive and steady and utterly reliable. They continued talking, their voices blending into a soundtrack I'd heard in different variations my whole life. The tone of entitlement, the casual assumption that my things were their things, that my space was their space, that my life existed primarily to serve their needs and smooth their paths. I listened to them discuss flower arrangements and color schemes, photographer recommendations and catering menus, timeline logistics and parking arrangements. They debated whether to hire a string quartet or a jazz trio. They wondered aloud if 200 guests was enough or if they should expand to 250. Not once did anyone say my name except to dismiss my potential objections before I'd even made them. My heart didn't pound. My hands didn't shake. Instead, something cold and clear settled over me like morning fog over the ocean. This wasn't shock. It was recognition. I'd been here before in different rooms, listening to different conversations that all carried the same message. Tara doesn't matter. Tara will comply. Tara owes us. I backed away from the door, carefully, quietly, the way you back away from something dangerous you don't want to provoke. I walked to my car, slid into the driver's seat, and sat there for a long moment staring at my own front door. 20 minutes passed. Maybe 30. Time felt strange and elastic. Then I started. The engine pulled out of my driveway and drove toward the beach. I parked in the public lot and walked down to the water's edge, letting the wind whip my hair around my face, letting the sound of waves drown out the echo of my mother's voice, still ringing in my ears. I stood there watching the tide come in, and I made a decision. Not a hot, angry decision born from impulse. A cold, calculated decision that felt like ice forming over deep water. For the first time in my 35 years, I wasn't going to explain, justify, or rationalize. I wasn't going to make excuses for them or talk myself into understanding their perspective. I wasn't going to be reasonable or accommodating or mature about this. I was going to teach them exactly what happens when you mistake silence for permission. That night, I realized I was never their daughter, just their convenience. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and memories I'd spent years trying to forget came flooding back with perfect, painful clarity. It's strange how the mind works. You think you've moved past something, filed it away in a drawer. You'll never open again. And then one moment cracks everything wide open, and suddenly you're 8 years old again, standing in the living room of our old house with your mother's fury raining down on you for something you didn't do. I was 8 when Lily broke my mother's favorite crystal vase. I can still see it happening in slow motion, Lily spinning around in her ballet costume, practicing pirouettes she'd learned that week, her small arms extended completely oblivious to the antique side table and the Waterford vase perched on top of it. Her hand connected with the crystal, and it toppled, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces across the hardwood floor. I'd been reading in the corner, curled up with a library book about dolphins, completely absorbed in my own world. The crash brought my mother running from the kitchen, and I looked up to see Lily's face crumple into tears, her bottom lip trembling the way it always did before she started wailing. "Tara." My mother's voice was sharp as the broken glass scattered across the floor. You were supposed to be watching your sister. How could you let this happen?" I opened my mouth to protest, to point out that I was just sitting there reading that Lily was old enough to know not to dance near furniture, that this wasn't my fault. But my mother's expression stopped the words in my throat. She'd already decided. Lily was crying in her arms, and I was the one who got sent to my room without dinner, the one who had to write a letter of apology for being irresponsible, the one who had to do extra chores for a week to learn about consequences. Lily got ice cream after dinner and sympathy for being startled by the loud noise. That was the first time I recognized the pattern, though I didn't have words for it then. I just knew that somehow in our family I was always responsible for everything that went wrong, and Lily was always protected from everything that might make her uncomfortable. By the time I was 12, the pattern had calcified into something I accepted as normal. Lily failed her history test, a big one worth 30% of her grade, because she'd spent the study week shopping with friends instead of preparing. My mother's solution was to pull me out of soccer practice, the one activity I loved more than anything, the one place where I felt competent and valued and part of something. For 6 weeks every day after school, I sat at the dining room table drilling Lily on dates and historical events, while my team practiced without me. I missed the championship tournament. My coach called the house to ask if I was okay if something was wrong. My mother told her I had family obligations, and that was the end of it. Lily passed her makeup test with a C+. My mother praised her for working so hard. Nobody thanked me. I asked if I could rejoin the team, and my mother looked at me with genuine confusion. "The season's almost over anyway, Tara. Don't be dramatic." When I was 15, Lily decided she wanted the bedroom with the ocean view, my bedroom, the one I'd had since we moved to that house when I was 10. She said the morning light in my room was better for her complexion, and that she needed a creative space to develop her artistic sensibilities. I came home from school one day to find my belongings already boxed up and moved to the smaller bedroom at the back of the house, the one that faced the neighbor's fence and got no natural light. My mother explained that Lily was going through a sensitive time and needed support, and couldn't I please be mature about this and stop making everything difficult? I learned to stop asking for things. I learned to expect nothing. I learned that my role in the family was to be the shock absorber, the one who bent and flexed and accommodated so that everyone else could remain rigid and comfortable. But the scholarship, that was the moment something inside me actually broke. I was 22, finishing my undergraduate degree in finance when I got the letter. Full scholarship to graduate school, including a $15,000 annual living stipend. I'd worked so hard for it, maintained a perfect GPA while working part-time, spent months on my application essay. When the acceptance came, I actually cried with joy. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, valued, chosen for something based on my own merit. I drove to my parents' house to tell them in person, imagining my mother's proud smile, my father's congratulations, maybe even Lily being happy for me. Instead, my mother's face fell the moment I explained what the scholarship meant. She listened to me talk about the program, the opportunities, the future I was building, and then she got very quiet. Within 3 days, she'd cornered me in her kitchen with news that Lily needed money for art classes in the city, that this was Lily's chance to find her passion, that family meant sacrifice, that I was being selfish to pursue my own ambitions when my sister needed support. The conversation lasted 2 hours. By the end, I'd agreed to decline the scholarship, work 2 jobs, and give Lily the money she needed. I told myself I was being a good sister, a good daughter, that this was what family meant. I watched Lily take expensive painting classes she quit after 5 weeks because the instructor didn't understand her vision. I watched her move on to pottery, then photography, then creative writing, each new passion funded by money I earned serving tables at night and doing data entry during the day. I watched my graduate school opportunity evaporate while I paid for Lily's endless quest to discover herself. That was when I stopped looking to my family for anything. I stopped expecting fairness or recognition or love that didn't come with conditions and price tags. I put myself through graduate school at night, 1 class at a time, paying out of pocket, taking 6 years to finish a 2-year program. I built my career through sheer determination, working longer hours than anyone else, proving myself over and over, because I'd learned that nothing would be handed to me. When I got married, I kept my finances separate from my husband David's, saving, obsessively protecting myself in ways I couldn't articulate, but somehow knew I needed. When the marriage fell apart 3 years ago, I didn't call my mother. I didn't ask my father for advice. I hired a lawyer, divided the assets, and walked away with my half. I took every penny I'd saved and bought the beach house, a place that was entirely mine, that nobody could claim or take or borrow or occupy without my permission. I spent weekends sanding floors and painting walls, choosing every detail myself, creating a sanctuary where I made the rules and set the boundaries and decided who was welcome. The house was my declaration of independence, my fortress, my proof that I'd survived them and built something beautiful in spite of everything they'd taken from me. And now they wanted the one thing I built without them. What my family didn't know, what my mother had never known, was that the beach house had always been meant for me long before I had the money or the strength to claim it. I was 18 when my grandmother Catherine called me. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late spring, and I was home from my freshman year of college, sitting on the porch of my parents' house trying to study for finals. My phone rang with her number, and I answered, expecting our usual pleasant small talk. Instead, her voice was serious, almost urgent. "Tara, I need you to meet me at a lawyer's office tomorrow. Don't tell your mother." Catherine had been estranged from Margaret for years, a rift I never fully understood as a child, though I understand it perfectly now. My grandmother saw what my mother was, saw how she treated me, and had been watching from a careful distance, waiting for the right moment to act. That moment apparently was my 18th birthday. The next day, I sat in a lawyer's office in downtown Portland, completely bewildered, while Catherine explained that she'd purchased a property, a small beach house on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, and she was putting both our names on the deed, 70% hers, 30% mine. She slid papers across the mahogany desk, her aged hands steady and sure. "This will be yours someday, not theirs," she said, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made me sit up straighter. "Don't tell your mother. She doesn't need to know, and she wouldn't understand anyway. This is between you and me." I was too young to fully grasp what she was doing, too overwhelmed by the formality of lawyers and deeds and percentages. I signed where she told me to sign, my 18-year-old signature, shaky and uncertain, next to her elegant script. Catherine paid all the expenses, told me it was our secret, and said we'd talk more about it when I was older. I left that office feeling special and chosen and utterly confused. Margaret never knew about the co-ownership. She knew her mother had purchased a beach property, assumed Catherine was renting it out or using it as a vacation home, and the two of them maintained their cold distance without ever discussing details. I kept the secret because Catherine asked me to, and because even then some part of me understood that this gift needed protection from my mother's reach. 3 years ago, when my marriage to David was crumbling, and I felt like I was drowning in failure and shame, Catherine passed away. She was 87, died peacefully in her sleep, and left me a letter along with her lawyer's contact information. The letter was brief and clear. "The house is yours now completely. Build yourself a life there that nobody can take from you. You've earned your freedom, my darling girl. Now claim it." The lawyer's letter that followed explained everything in legal terms. Catherine's will transferred her 70% of the beach house entirely to me, making me the sole owner of a property I'd barely thought about in the years since I'd signed those papers. The house had been rented out to vacationers, maintained by a property management company, sitting there waiting for me like a gift I didn't know I'd been given. I drove out to see it the day after the divorce was finalized. It was smaller than I'd imagined, weathered by salt air and neglect, the deck railings sagging and the paint peeling in long strips. It was also the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I stood on that broken deck, looked out at the endless gray-blue ocean, and felt something crack open inside my chest, not breaking, but expanding like a door I didn't know existed, suddenly swinging wide. I poured everything into that house. Every weekend for 6 months, I drove out with supplies from the hardware store and worked until my hands blistered and my back ached. I sanded the floors myself on my knees with an electric sander, watching decades of wear disappear under my hands to reveal the beautiful oak underneath. I painted every wall, choosing colors that made me feel calm, soft grays and warm creams. Nothing loud or demanding. I replaced the deck railings with my own hands, learning carpentry from YouTube videos, making mistakes and fixing them until everything was solid and safe. The kitchen became my favorite project. I installed open shelving and filled it with dishes I chose myself. Simple white plates, handmade mugs from local artists, glasses that caught the light. I taught myself to cook in that kitchen, following recipes from books I checked out from the library, learning that nourishing myself could be an act of love instead of obligation. The meals I made there tasted better than anything I'd eaten at my mother's table, maybe because I made them for myself without apology. I built a library in the second bedroom, lining the walls with bookshelves I assembled piece by piece. Every morning I sat in the chair by the window with my coffee and read history poetry novels that made me think and feel and remember I had an interior life that belonged to me alone. That room represented every bit of education I'd given myself, every book I'd read late at night, after working double shifts, every piece of knowledge I'd fought for when nobody thought I needed it. The master bedroom overlooking the ocean became my sanctuary. I positioned the bed so I'd wake up to the view of endless water, so the sound of waves would be the first thing I heard each morning and the last thing before sleep. That room represented peace I'd never known in my childhood home, where I'd always been braced for the next criticism, the next demand, the next sacrifice required of me. This house wasn't just property or investment or real estate. It was the physical manifestation of my journey from the girl who gave up her scholarship to the woman who built something beautiful from ruins. Every corner held proof that I was capable, strong, worthy of beauty and peace and space that nobody could claim. To them, it was just a stage for another performance. 4 days after I'd overheard them planning the wedding at my house, my mother called to invite me to what she described as a special family dinner at Oriole, the most expensive restaurant in Portland. Her voice had that careful brightness that meant she was orchestrating something and I should dress appropriately. I almost declined, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see what they were planning, wanted to watch them perform whatever script my mother had written. I arrived at the restaurant to find my parents already seated at a large corner table with a view of the city lights. My mother wore her pearls and a navy dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. My father sat beside her in his best suit, looking vaguely uncomfortable, the way he always did at fancy restaurants, like he'd rather be home watching television in his recliner. Then Lily swept in, and I understood immediately why we were there. She looked stunning in a cream-colored designer dress I recognized from a boutique window downtown, the kind of dress that cost $3,000 and required a specific type of confidence to wear. Her hair was professionally styled, her makeup flawless, and on her arm was a man I'd never met, but had heard about in passing during my mother's phone calls, Ethan Cole. He was exactly what I expected. Tall, easily 6'2", with dark hair styled with just enough product to look effortless. Handsome in that polished way that comes from good genetics and expensive grooming. His suit fit perfectly, his shoes gleamed, and when he smiled at my mother, I saw her practically glow with satisfaction. This was the son-in-law she'd always wanted, the trophy she could display at her bridge club and charitable foundation meetings. "Everyone, I want you to meet my fiancé," Lily announced, her voice bright with excitement that seemed genuine enough. She held up her left hand to display a substantial diamond ring that caught the restaurant's ambient lighting beautifully. My mother stood to embrace them both, and I watched her transform into the version of herself she presented to the outside world. Gracious, warm, the picture of maternal pride. "This is such a blessing," she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "The joining of two excellent families. Ethan, welcome. You're getting a wonderful girl." Throughout dinner, I played my role, the supportive older sister, asking polite questions and offering appropriate congratulations. But I watched. I've always been good at watching, at noticing the details people think they're hiding. Ethan's watch was a Rolex, probably authentic from the weight and the way it caught the light. but his cufflinks were cheap imitations of a luxury brand, the kind you buy on websites that promise designer quality at fraction prices. When the sommelier brought the wine list, Ethan made a show of studying it carefully before selecting the second most expensive bottle, a classic move of someone trying to appear wealthy without actually spending wealthy person money. Real wealth doesn't perform like that. Real wealth is quiet. He talked about his work in wealth management, but his descriptions were oddly vague. When my father asked which firm he worked for, Ethan smoothly redirected the conversation, mentioning a few high-profile clients he'd consulted with, without ever naming his actual employer. He dropped references to exclusive clubs, the Arlington, the Metropolitan Society, but got small details wrong, the kind of details only someone who'd actually been there would know. I'd been to the Arlington once for a work function. Their main dining room faces east, not west, like Ethan claimed. When Lily talked about maybe going back to school, about finding work that felt meaningful, Ethan's eyes went distant. He smiled and nodded, but he wasn't listening. He was already scanning the restaurant, probably calculating who might see him here with his beautiful fiancée. What impression they were making. When she mentioned wanting to travel to Southeast Asia before settling down, he patted her hand and said, "We'll see, sweetheart," in the tone you'd use with a child asking for a puppy. The bill arrived, and I watched Ethan reach for his wallet with theatrical slowness, making sure everyone saw the gesture while moving just incrementally enough that my father, predictable, reliable Richard, picked up the check before Ethan's wallet even cleared his jacket pocket. Ethan protested once weakly, then accepted with gracious thanks. After dinner, my parents walked Lily and Ethan to the valet while I excused myself to the restroom. On my way back, I passed the restaurant's covered patio area where my mother stood alone, phone pressed to her ear, her back to the door. "Finally, Patricia, finally," she was saying, her voice stripped of the warm, maternal tone she'd used all evening. "Lily is marrying well. This is exactly what we needed. The wedding will put the Whitman name back on the map. I'm thinking 200 guests minimum. Maybe we can get it featured in Coastal Elegance magazine. We need a venue that photographs beautifully, somewhere that makes a statement." I stood very still, hidden by a decorative column. "Think about it," my mother continued. "This erases everything. Tara's divorce was such an embarrassment, everyone whispering about how she couldn't keep a husband. But now we have Lily marrying into success, marrying a wealth manager with connections. This opens doors, the country club, the symphony board, the Children's Hospital Gala Committee. I've been trying to get on that committee for 5 years. She paused, listening to whatever Patricia said on the other end. "Lily's happy. I'm sure she's happy," my mother said dismissively. "But honestly, that's secondary. What matters is that the Whitman family is hosting an event that people will talk about for years. I'm meeting with wedding planners next week. This has to be perfect, Patricia. This has to prove that my daughters, both of them, are successful, accomplished women from a good family. This is our redemption." I backed away before she could turn around and see me standing there. I walked to my car with my mother's words echoing in my head, each sentence clarifying what I'd always suspected but never wanted to believe. Lily's happiness wasn't the point. Love wasn't the point. Even Ethan, with all his performed success and careful grooming, wasn't really the point. It wasn't a wedding. It was a campaign. A week after the engagement dinner, my mother called to invite me to what she described as just a casual family dinner, nothing fancy, just us. Her tone was light, almost suspiciously cheerful, and I felt that familiar tightening in my stomach that meant she was planning something. I almost made an excuse, but some instinct told me I needed to see whatever she was orchestrating. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I arrived at my parents' house on a Wednesday evening to find 4 unfamiliar cars parked along the street. Casual family dinner, she'd said. The lie was so blatant it would have been funny if it weren't so perfectly on brand. I walked up the front path and let myself in, and the scene that greeted me confirmed every suspicion. The dining room table was set with my mother's finest china, the pieces she only brought out for holidays and important guests. Candles flickered in silver holders. Fresh flowers, expensive ones, lilies and roses, sat in a crystal vase at the center. My mother wore her pearls and a silk blouse, her hair freshly styled makeup camera ready. Around the table sat Lily and Ethan, my father in his usual spot, and three of my mother's closest friends, Patricia, Diane, and Carol, women I recognized from her bridge club and various charitable committees. This wasn't a family dinner. This was theater, and I'd been cast in a role I hadn't auditioned for. "Tara, darling, you're here." My mother swept over to kiss my cheek, her performance of maternal warmth flawless. "Come sit, we're just about to serve the main course. You know Patricia, Diane, and Carol, of course." The women smiled at me with that particular blend of curiosity and judgment that women of my mother's generation have perfected. I took the empty seat between Diane and my father, accepting a glass of wine I had no intention of drinking, my radar already on high alert. Dinner conversation flowed predictably, updates on grandchildren, complaints about the new highway construction, praise for the meal my mother had clearly catered but pretended to have cooked herself. I picked at my chicken and responded with appropriate murmurs, watching my mother watch me, waiting for whatever she'd planned. It came midway through the main course. My mother stood tapping her wine glass with a fork until the table fell silent. She had that glow about her, that particular radiance she got when she was about to do something she considered brilliant. "I have wonderful news to share," she announced, her voice warm and conspiratorial. "Our beloved Tara has generously agreed to host Lily's wedding at her beautiful beach house." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. The piece of chicken suspended there suddenly felt like lead. Time seemed to slow down, every face at the table turning toward me with expectant smiles, waiting for me to confirm this generous offer I'd never made. I hadn't agreed to anything. We'd never discussed it. She'd simply decided and was now announcing it as established fact in front of witnesses, daring me to contradict her publicly. "Oh, Tara, thank you so much." Lily's voice was bright with genuine excitement, her hands clasped together like a child on Christmas morning. "I've always dreamed of a beach wedding ever since you bought that house. I've imagined how perfect it would be for something like this. The sunset, the waves, it's going to be absolutely magical." Ethan nodded, raising his wineglass toward me. "Very generous of you, Tara. It's the perfect venue." Patricia beamed. "How wonderful, what a loving sister you are." Diane added, "The beach house, I've heard, it's absolutely stunning. You're so fortunate to have such a close family." Carol chimed in. "This is what family is all about, isn't it? Supporting each other during life's beautiful moments." Every eye was on me. Every smile was expectant. The trap had been sprung with perfect precision, and I understood immediately that my mother had planned this down to the smallest detail. If I objected now, if I said I'd never agreed to this, I would be the villain of the story. Selfish Tara, jealous Tara, bitter divorced Tara, who couldn't bear to see her beautiful younger sister happy. I'd be cruel, petty, small-minded. My mother would get to comfort Lily while shooting me disappointed looks, and these witnesses would go home and tell everyone they knew about Margaret's difficult older daughter who couldn't even do this one thing for family. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. I felt my father's eyes on me, though he said nothing, as always. I felt my mother's satisfaction radiating across the table, her certainty that she'd outmaneuvered me. I set down my fork very carefully. I arranged my face into what I hoped passed for a smile. I nodded, a small mechanical movement that could be interpreted as agreement without me having to form actual words of consent. "Tara's a little overwhelmed, I think," my mother said, interpreting my silence for the table. "She's always been the quiet one, keeping her emotions close. But I can see how happy this makes her, being able to give this gift to her sister." For the rest of dinner, I sat in my chair like a mannequin, while the conversation swirled around me. Lily talked about flowers she was thinking, white roses and peonies, maybe some delicate baby's breath. She described the color scheme, blush pink and gold, elegant but romantic. She wondered aloud if the ceremony should be at sunset or slightly before to get the best light for photographs. She asked if my deck was large enough for the reception, or if they'd need to set up tents on the beach. I made appropriate sounds, at appropriate intervals. I nodded when nodding seemed required. Inside, I felt perfectly, crystallinely calm. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even angry. I was simply observing, taking mental notes, cataloging every assumption they made, every plan they discussed, every way they claimed ownership of something that had never been theirs to claim. My mother squeezed my shoulder as she cleared plates, leaning down to whisper near my ear. I always knew I could count on Tara to do the right thing for family. Patricia raised her glass. To Tara, for her incredible generosity. Everyone drank. Everyone smiled. Everyone played their assigned role in my mother's carefully orchestrated production. Except this time I was writing a different script. They just didn't know it yet. They mistook my silence for surrender. The morning after the dinner trap, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I called in sick to work the first time I'd done so in over 18 months and drove to Cannon Beach, a small coastal town about 40 minutes north of my house. I needed distance from Portland, from my family, from the suffocating weight of expectation that had settled over me like a fog I couldn't see through. I parked near a cafe I'd visited a few times before, a quiet place with large windows overlooking the ocean and decent coffee. The kind of place where you could sit for hours without anyone bothering you. I ordered an Americano and took a table by the window, staring out at the gray water without really seeing it. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for my coffee to go cold. Long enough for the morning rush to thin out and the cafe to settle into mid-morning quiet. Forgive me for intruding, but you look like you could use someone to talk to. I looked up to find an elegant woman standing beside my table holding her own coffee cup. She was probably in her late 60s with silver hair cut in a sleek bob and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. I recognized her vaguely. We'd exchanged pleasantries here before, casual comments about the weather or the view, the kind of small talk you make with familiar strangers. I'm Marilyn, she said. Marilyn Shaw. We've said hello a few times. You don't have to talk to me, of course, but I've been practicing law for 40 years and I know the look of someone carrying a burden they're not sure how to set down. Something in her voice, not pity but recognition, made me gesture to the empty chair across from me. I'm Tara, I said. And yes, actually, I think I would like to talk. She sat down and I started talking. Once I started, I couldn't stop. I told her about the dinner, about my mother announcing the wedding venue without asking me about being trapped by social pressure and witnesses. Then I found myself going further back, the scholarship I'd given up, the childhood pattern of being blamed for everything. While Lily was protected from consequences, the way my needs had always been treated as negotiable while everyone else's were sacred. Marilyn listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful, but not shocked. When I finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a moment, sipping her coffee and looking out at the ocean. 30 years ago, she said finally, my mother died and left everything to my brother. The house, the investments, the family business, everything. She'd rewritten her will 6 months before her death when she was already suffering from dementia. My brother had convinced her that I didn't care about the family, that I'd abandoned them by becoming a lawyer instead of staying home to help run the business. She turned her gaze back to me, and I saw something hard and knowing in her eyes. I fought it legally. I had grounds the will was written when she lacked capacity. There was clear evidence of undue influence. But the legal battle took 3 years and cost me a fortune and most of my relationships with extended family. I won eventually, got a settlement that was a fraction of what I deserved. But by then I'd lost years of my life to bitterness and rage. What changed? I asked. I learned that revenge isn't about burning bridges, Marilyn said. It's about letting them collapse under the weight of someone else's lies while you stand on solid ground. I started practicing family law specifically because of what happened to me. I've spent 3 decades watching narcissistic parents manipulate their children, watching golden child and scapegoat dynamics destroy families. What you're describing, it's textbook, and I know exactly how it ends if you don't set boundaries that actually have teeth. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me something, Tara. Who actually owns your beach house? Is your name on the deed? The question caught me off guard. I inherited it from my grandmother 3 years ago. It's mine. I've been paying the property taxes, the insurance, everything. But have you verified the ownership documentation, pulled the deed from county records, confirmed that your name is the only name on the title? I realized with a small shock that I hadn't. I'd received a letter from my grandmother's lawyer saying the house was mine, had started paying the bills, and assumed everything was legally clear. But I'd never actually looked at the deed itself, never confirmed the details. "That's the first thing we do," Marilyn said. "We verify ownership. We get documentation that proves legally and irrevocably that the house is yours and yours alone. Then we document everything your family says and does, every assumption they make, every plan they announce, every way they treat your property as theirs." "And then," I asked, "then we use the legal system, not emotion, not confrontation, but law to establish your rights. The most elegant revenge isn't dramatic. It's not screaming or accusations or public scenes. It's creating a situation where the truth speaks louder than any argument you could make. It's letting people destroy themselves with their own entitlement while you simply enforce the boundaries that should have existed all along." She pulled a business card from her purse and slid it across the table. "I'm retired from active practice, but I still consult. And I'd be happy to help you think through this strategically. Not because I need the work, but because I remember what it felt like to be where you are, and I wish someone had helped me see clearly before I wasted years on the wrong approach." I picked up the card, feeling something shift in my chest. Not quite hope, but something close to it. A sense that maybe I didn't have to choose between rolling over or burning everything down. Maybe there was a third option I hadn't considered. "They think they've won," I said quietly. "They think I'll just go along with it like I always do." Marilyn smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd fought her own battles and come out the other side with scars but also wisdom. "Let them think that. Let them plan and assume and take for granted. Meanwhile, you'll be building a foundation they can't shake. When the time comes, they won't even see it coming." We talked for another hour, Marilyn asking questions that helped me see the situation with startling clarity. She helped me understand that what I was dealing with wasn't just rudeness or thoughtlessness. It was a pattern of behavior that would never change through reasoning or appealing to their better nature, because people like my mother didn't operate from a place of reciprocity or fairness. By the time I left that cafe, I had Marilyn's number in my phone, and the beginning of a plan forming in my mind. Not a hot, impulsive plan born from hurt feelings. A cold, methodical plan built on documentation and legal rights, and the simple, devastating power of enforcing boundaries that should have existed all along. That night, the plan began with one quiet phone call. The phone call I made that night was to an electronics store that specialized in home security systems. I explained that I wanted voice-activated recording devices for my property, the kind designed to monitor for break-ins or document conversations in case of legal disputes. The sales associate recommended a set of small discrete units that could be placed in common areas and would activate automatically when they detected sound. Completely legal, he assured me, as long as I was recording on my own property. 2 days later, I installed 3 devices in my beach house. One in the kitchen, tucked behind a decorative canister on the counter. One in the living room, positioned on a bookshelf between 2 large art books. One on the back patio, hidden inside a ceramic planter near the seating area where people naturally gathered to admire the view. I tested each one carefully, speaking at normal volume from different positions in each room, then playing back the recordings to verify clarity. The audio quality was excellent, every word crisp and clear. I also bought a leather-bound journal from a stationery store and began documenting everything. Date, time, who was present, what was said. I wrote in careful detail, quoting exact phrases when I could remember them, summarizing tone and context. Marilyn had reviewed my documentation plan and approved it, explaining that contemporaneous notes records made at or near the time events occurred carried significant weight if we ever needed to establish a pattern of behavior. I didn't have to wait long for my mother and Lily to provide material. 3 days after I installed the recording devices, my mother called to say she and Lily would be stopping by the beach house to take some measurements and get a feel for the space. not asking if this was convenient, not requesting permission to enter my home, just informing me of their plans. I told her I'd be at work, but they were welcome to use the key I'd given her years ago for emergencies. My voice was pleasant, accommodating exactly what they expected. That evening, I came home and downloaded the audio files from the devices. I made myself a cup of tea, settled into my favorite chair with my laptop and headphones, and pressed play. My mother's voice filled my ears, confident and casual. "This main room is perfect for the reception. We can push all the furniture against the walls, maybe rent some elegant cocktail tables. The view through those windows will photograph beautifully." Lily's voice excited and slightly breathless. "What about the ceremony itself? I'm thinking on the deck, definitely. We can set up rows of white chairs, an arch with flowers, and I'll walk down between the rows with the ocean behind me." "Exactly what I was thinking," my mother agreed. "We'll need to hire people to deep clean everything the week before. This floor will need professional polishing, and those windows have to be spotless. I'll make a list of vendors." There was a pause, the sound of footsteps, cabinet doors opening and closing. "Do you think Tara will actually be okay with all this?" Lily asked, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty that surprised me. My mother's response was immediate and dismissive. "Tara won't fight back. She never does. She'll complain privately, maybe sulk a bit, but she's too afraid of looking like the bad guy to actually say no in any meaningful way. Trust me, I know my daughter." "She seemed kind of quiet at dinner," Lily pressed, "like maybe she wasn't really on board." "Your sister has always been difficult," my mother said, and I heard the familiar edge of irritation in her voice, the tone she used when my existence inconvenienced her. "This house is the least she can do after everything. I raised her, fed her, dealt with her moods and her sulking for 20 years. She owes this family more than she'll ever be able to repay, and hosting your wedding is a small enough request." I listened to them discuss paint touch-ups they thought necessary, debate whether the kitchen was large enough for caterers to work in wonder aloud, if they should have a bartender stationed on the deck or inside. They spoke about my house with the casual ownership of people discussing their own property, making plans and decisions without a single acknowledgement that they were guests in a home that wasn't theirs. The second visit happened 4 days later. This time they brought fabric swatches and photographs of wedding decorations, discussing color schemes and how different shades would look against my walls. The third visit, a week after that, included measuring tape and a notebook where my mother sketched furniture arrangements and traffic flow patterns. But it was the fourth recording, captured just 2 weeks before I'd eventually need to execute my plan, that provided the most damning evidence. My mother was alone in the house, and I heard her footsteps moving from room to room, the sound of her talking on her phone. I recognized the rhythm of her conversation, the particular tone she used with Patricia. "I'm at the beach house now getting everything organized," my mother was saying. "You should see this place, Patricia. Tara really has done well for herself, I'll give her that." Though of course she had help, her grandmother left her money, and the divorce settlement didn't hurt. Patricia must have said something, because my mother laughed a sound without real warmth. "Managing Tara. Oh, I've been doing that her whole life. She's too soft to make real decisions on her own. Someone has to guide her, even if she doesn't appreciate it. That's what mothers do. We see what our children need better than they see it themselves. This wedding will actually be good for Tara too. It'll remind her what family means, get her involved in something bigger than her own small life. She spends too much time alone out here brooding. This will force her to be social, to contribute." There was a pause while she listened. "No, she won't cause problems," my mother continued, her voice full of certainty. "Tara knows how things work. She might not like it, but she'll go along because that's what she does. She's been doing it for 35 years. Why would she change now?" I sat in my chair listening to that recording 3 times, my tea growing cold beside me. Each time I felt something solidify inside me. Not anger exactly, but a cold, crystalline resolve. My mother truly believed she was helping me, believed her control was a form of care, believed she had the right to manage my life because I was too incompetent to manage it myself. The recordings painted a portrait of someone who'd never seen me as a full person, only as a supporting character in her own story. Someone who'd convinced herself that manipulation was love, that control was guidance, that my compliance was proof of her good mothering, rather than evidence of the compliance I'd been trained into since childhood. I saved all the audio files with detailed labels, backed them up to 3 different locations, and added summaries to my written documentation. Every word they'd said in my house, every assumption they'd made, every plan they'd announced without my consent, it was all there, preserved and cataloged and ready. They wanted a quiet daughter. I'd give them silence with paperwork. The first step, Marilyn insisted, was verification. Before we could build any plan on the foundation of my ownership, we needed to confirm beyond any doubt that the house was legally, irrevocably mine. She gave me the address of the county registrar's office and explicit instructions on what documents to request. I took a personal day from work and drove downtown to the records office, a gray municipal building that smelled like old paper and floor polish. I filled out the request forms, paid the small fee, and waited while a clerk disappeared into the back room to retrieve the property records. 20 minutes later, she returned with a manila folder containing the complete ownership history of my beach house. I sat in the waiting area and read through every page. The original deed, dated 17 years ago, showed the property purchased by Catherine Whitman and Tara Whitman as joint tenants, 70% and 30% respectively. My signature was there, shaky and uncertain, exactly as I remembered signing it in that lawyer's office when I was barely 18 and had no idea what I was agreeing to. Attached was my grandmother's will filed with the county 3 years ago after her death, explicitly transferring her 70% share to me in its entirety. The current deed, updated and recorded, showed one name only, Tara Marie Whitman. Sole owner, 100%. I made 3 copies of everything, had them certified by the county clerk, and drove directly to Marilyn's office with the documents clutched against my chest like treasure. She reviewed each page with the careful attention of someone who'd spent decades reading legal documents, occasionally making small notations on a yellow pad beside her. When she finished, she looked up at me with satisfaction. "Perfect," she said. "Your grandmother was remarkably thorough. This ownership is airtight. No claims from your mother, no ambiguity, no room for argument. You have absolute legal authority over this property, and you have for 3 years. Your mother has been operating under a false assumption, and that assumption is about to cost her dearly." "What's next?" I asked. Marilyn pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. "I know someone," she said. "A production company that does commercial photography and film work, completely legitimate, fully insured, established business. They regularly rent properties for shoots. The owner, Daniel Reeves, is someone I've worked with on other matters. He's discreet, professional, and he'll understand exactly what we're doing." She made the call while I sat in her office, and I listened to her side of the conversation with growing amazement at how efficiently she worked. She explained the situation in broad strokes: family conflict need for a legitimate rental agreement, specific dates that needed to be blocked. By the time she hung up, we had a meeting scheduled for the following afternoon. Daniel Reeves met us at a coffee shop near the waterfront, a man in his 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes that assessed me carefully before he smiled. Marilyn made introductions, and we sat down to discuss terms. "I need exclusive use of a beach property for a weekend in late September," he said, pulling out his tablet to show me examples of previous projects. "We're doing a coastal lifestyle shoot for a furniture catalog. Your property would be ideal, the natural light, the ocean views, the deck space. We'd need full access from Friday evening through Sunday afternoon." The weekend he named was exactly the weekend of Lily's wedding. "We pay fairly," he continued. $5,000 for the 3-day rental, plus we carry comprehensive insurance that covers any damage, and we provide our own security personnel to ensure the property stays secure during the shoot. We also notify local police in advance when we're doing location work, just as a courtesy and to handle any traffic or parking issues." I watched him pull up a standard contract on his tablet, the kind of document his company used for every property rental. Marilyn leaned forward to review it, her eyes scanning each clause with professional precision. "We'll need to add specific language," she said. Exclusive use means no access for anyone not authorized by Coastal Productions, including family members of the property owner. Any unauthorized persons attempting to enter will be treated as trespassers. We'll also need a no cancellation clause with a substantial penalty, let's say $25,000 if either party breaches. Daniel nodded, making notes. Standard for our contracts, actually. We can't have our shoots disrupted, and property owners need assurance we won't back out at the last minute. I'll add language specifying that the owner won't be present during the rental period and won't have access to the property during our exclusive use window. Over the next hour, we refined the contract until it was exactly what we needed. The rental would begin at 6 o'clock Friday evening and end at 6 o'clock Sunday evening. Coastal Productions would have complete control of the property during that time. Security personnel would be on site. Local police would be notified in advance about the commercial activity. Tara Whitman, as property owner, would not be present and would not access the property during the rental period. Most importantly, there was language establishing that this was a legitimate business transaction entered into in good faith with payment insurance and all proper legal protections. If anyone questioned it later, the contract would show that I'd rented my property to a legitimate company for a legitimate business purpose exactly as was my legal right as sole owner. One more thing, Marilyn said. The contract needs to be dated and notarized as soon as possible. We want a clear record that this agreement was made well before any wedding planning became public knowledge. We signed the contract that afternoon with a notary public Marilyn kept on retainer witnessing our signatures and affixing her seal. Daniel transferred $5,000 into my account as the rental payment. Marilyn filed a copy of the contract with the county recorder's office, creating a public record of the transaction. We sent courtesy notifications to the local police department about the planned commercial shoot, including dates, expected crew size, and security arrangements. Every step was documented, legal defensible. If anyone asked why I'd rented my house during my sister's wedding, I could honestly say I'd made the commitment weeks earlier and simply forgot to mention it. If my mother claimed I'd promised her the house, there would be no written agreement, no documentation, nothing but her word against a notarized rental contract filed with the county. The beauty of it was the simplicity. I wasn't doing anything wrong or illegal or even particularly creative. I was simply exercising my legal rights as a property owner to rent my house to a legitimate business. The fact that this rental happened to coincide with a wedding I'd never actually agreed to host was just an unfortunate scheduling conflict. Marilyn walked me to my car after we finished, her hand briefly touching my shoulder. "You understand what this means?" she asked. I nodded. For that weekend, I won't have any control over the property. Coastal Productions will. If my family shows up, it won't be me turning them away. It will be a security company protecting a legitimate business operation. Exactly, Marilyn said. You're not the villain of this story. You're just a property owner who made a business decision. Everything else is simply consequences. By law, I wasn't even the owner that weekend. The contract was signed, the plan was in motion, and I should have felt nothing but satisfaction. Instead, I felt restless, unsettled in a way I couldn't quite name. I kept my routine work during the day, quiet evenings at the beach house, weekly check-ins with Marilyn to review documentation. But underneath the calm surface, something was shifting. Then, on a Thursday night, nearly 2 weeks after I'd signed the rental contract, my phone rang at 10:30. Lily's name appeared on the screen, and I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. We hadn't spoken directly since the dinner trap, all communication mediated through our mother's group texts about wedding logistics. Tara. Her voice sounded strange, smaller than usual. I hope it's not too late to call. It's fine, I said, settling onto my couch with a wariness I couldn't quite shake. What's going on? There was a pause, the sound of her breathing, maybe the beginning of words she couldn't quite form. I just wanted to say thank you, she finally said, for being so understanding about the wedding, for letting us use your beautiful house. I know Mom kind of announced it without really asking you properly, and I've been feeling bad about that. The apology caught me off guard. In our family, apologies were rare, usually performative, almost never sincere. but Lily sounded genuinely uncertain, like she was testing unfamiliar ground. I also wanted to talk to someone. She continued, her words coming faster now. Someone who isn't Mom or Ethan or the wedding planner or the bridesmaids who keep asking me questions I don't know how to answer. Is that weird? That I'm calling you? No, I said slowly. It's not weird. We're sisters. She laughed, but it sounded more like a release of tension than humor. Sometimes I forget that. Sometimes I feel like we're just people who happen to share DNA and show up to the same holidays. For the next 20 minutes, Lily talked and I listened. She told me she was worried about Ethan, how he seemed distracted lately, always on his phone working late, canceling dinners they'd planned. She said the wedding had gotten so much bigger than she'd imagined that the guest list had somehow expanded to over 200 people, most of whom she barely knew. She admitted she'd wanted something smaller, more intimate, maybe just family and close friends on a beach somewhere quiet. But Mom said that would be selfish, Lily said, and I heard something in her voice that made my chest tighten. She said to think about what this means for the family, about the impression we're making, about how a wedding like this opens doors. And she's right, I guess. I shouldn't just think about what I want. There it was. The same language, the same framework that had been used on me my entire life. Your desires are selfish. Think about the family. Don't be difficult. Did you pick your wedding dress? I asked, already knowing the answer. Mom found it, Lily said. She took me to this boutique and the saleswoman brought it out and Mom's face just lit up. She said it was perfect, that I looked like a princess, and everyone in the store agreed. I mean, it is beautiful. It's just not exactly what I would have chosen for myself. I was thinking something simpler, but Mom said simple doesn't photograph well. What about the groomsmen? I asked. Ethan's college friends mostly. Actually, I think Mom picked them. She met them at some dinner Ethan's family hosted and decided they'd look good in photos. I don't really know them very well. The conversation continued, each revelation adding another piece to a picture I was beginning to see clearly. Margaret had chosen the venue, the dress, the guest list, the groomsmen, the flowers, the color scheme. Lily had been consulted on nothing, asked for input only as a formality before her mother overrode every preference with something more suitable, more impressive, more aligned with the image Margaret wanted to project. You always made things look so much harder than they were, Lily said suddenly, her voice wistful. Even when we were kids, you'd fight with Mom about the smallest things, argue about stuff that didn't matter. I never understood why you couldn't just go along, make things easier for everyone. I just want everything to be easy for once. You know, I just want peace. The words hit me like cold water. Lily thought I'd made things harder by having boundaries, by objecting to being controlled, by wanting autonomy over my own life. She'd learned that peace meant compliance, that ease meant surrender, that love was the reward you got for making yourself small enough to fit the shape someone else had chosen for you. Lily, I said carefully, do you love Ethan? The silence that followed was long enough that I thought she might have hung up. Then she laughed, but it sounded brittle, breakable. What kind of question is that? Of course I do. We're getting married. That's not what I asked. Another pause. I don't know what you want me to say, Tara. He's successful. He's handsome. Mom approves his family is well connected. Isn't that what love looks like when you're an adult? Practical decisions and partnership and building a life together. I closed my eyes, feeling something crack open in my chest. My sister was 28 years old and had no idea what her own feelings were, couldn't distinguish between love and convenience, between desire and duty. She'd been so thoroughly trained to ignore her own inner voice that she didn't even hear it anymore. Are you happy? I asked. I don't know, she whispered. I'm supposed to be right. This is everything I should want. Everything Mom says I should want. So why do I feel like I'm watching someone else's life instead of living my own? We talked for a few more minutes, but the conversation had nowhere left to go. Lily wasn't ready to hear what I could have told her, wasn't ready to see the cage she'd been living in. She thanked me again for the house, made me promise not to tell Mom she'd called sounding uncertain, and hung up with a cheerfulness that sounded forced even to my ears. I sat on my couch for a long time after staring at my dark television screen, feeling the weight of what I was about to do settle over me differently than before. This wasn't just about punishing Margaret anymore. The wedding I was going to destroy was also Lily's wedding, and regardless of how much our mother had manipulated it into something unrecognizable, Lily would be the bride standing there when everything collapsed. She'd be humiliated in front of 200 people. Her perfect day turned into a spectacle of chaos and public embarrassment. For a moment, I considered calling Marilyn, telling her we needed to stop, that the collateral damage was too high. I could still cancel the contract, pay the penalty, let the wedding happen. I could be the bigger person, the mature adult who rose above family dysfunction. But then, I thought about Lily's voice saying she didn't know if she was happy admitting she felt like she was watching someone else's life. I thought about her marrying a man who was already checked out emotionally, entering a marriage orchestrated by a mother who saw her as a prop rather than a person. I thought about the life stretching ahead of her, years of performing happiness, of making herself smaller to fit expectations, of wondering why she felt so empty when she had everything she was supposed to want. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is destroy the illusion before they build their entire life inside it. Sometimes you have to break the cage even if the person inside doesn't yet know they're trapped. Even pawns deserve to see the board. In the weeks that followed Lily's phone call, I started waking before dawn and walking the beach near my house. It became a ritual, this quiet communion with the ocean and my own thoughts before the rest of the world demanded anything from me. I'd make coffee in a travel mug, pull on my jacket against the morning chill, and walk the shoreline as the sky shifted from black to gray to the pale gold of early light. I thought about Marilyn's words during those walks, turned them over in my mind like smooth stones. Don't burn bridges, just let them collapse under the weight of someone else's lies while you stand on solid ground. What I was planning wasn't destruction for its own sake. It was boundary setting on a scale my family would finally unavoidably understand. For 35 years, I'd been trained to put everyone else first, to make myself smaller, so others could feel bigger, to absorb their needs and ignore my own, until I barely remembered I was allowed to have needs at all. This wedding demand wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a lifetime pattern, the logical endpoint of a relationship where my consent had never actually mattered. If I allowed it to happen, if I let them use my house for Lily's wedding after commandeering it without permission, I would be teaching them the same lesson I'd been teaching them my whole life, that there are no real limits with Tara, no actual consequences, no moment when my no will be respected as final. The sunrise always came at the same point in my walk, right when I reached the rocky outcropping at the north end of the beach. I'd stand there watching light spill across the water and feel something settle in my chest, a kind of peace that came from knowing I'd made a decision and committed to it fully. But the guilt came too, usually on the walk back. I'd imagine Lily's face when the police arrived, the confusion shifting to horror as she realized what was happening. I'd picture Margaret's public humiliation, the way her carefully constructed image would shatter in front of 200 witnesses and whoever was recording on their phones. I'd hear the inevitable phone calls afterward, cousins and aunts and family friends calling me cruel, vindictive, jealous. I'd imagine Richard finally speaking up, not to defend me or acknowledge his own complicity, but to shame me for ruining my sister's special day. Part of me wanted to be the bigger person. Part of me wanted to believe that I could simply tell them no, firmly draw a clear boundary with words alone and let them be angry without needing to prove my point so dramatically. It would be easier, cleaner, less likely to make me the villain in everyone's stories about the Whitman family drama. But I knew better. I'd spent 35 years watching no fail to work with my mother. Every time I'd tried to set a boundary, it had been ignored, negotiated around, or punished until I relented. When I'd said no to giving up my scholarship, Margaret had spent a week making me feel so guilty that I'd eventually given in. When I'd objected to being moved out of my bedroom at 15, I'd been told I was being childish and selfish until I'd stopped objecting. When I'd tried to limit my mother's visits to my house after my divorce, she'd shown up anyway and acted hurt that I'd even suggested boundaries. My mother didn't respect boundaries that were spoken. She only respected boundaries that were enforced, and even then, only when the enforcement was so absolute she couldn't find a way around it. This time, my no needed to be undeniable, backed by law and contract, and consequences she couldn't manipulate away. 3 days before the wedding, I went to the beach house to complete my final preparations. I'd already signed all the necessary documents with Coastal Productions, transferred the temporary property access, confirmed the security arrangements. Now I needed to remove anything personal, anything that mattered to me before I handed the house over to strangers for the weekend. I packed carefully, methodically. Photo albums went into boxes. My grandmother's jewelry, the few pieces I kept in the bedroom safe, went into my purse. Journals, personal correspondence, my favorite books, everything that held emotional weight got loaded into my car. I left the furniture, the kitchenware, the decorative items that made the house look lived in but didn't actually mean anything to me. The house felt strange when I'd finished, like a stage set rather than a home. Clean, neutral, beautiful, but impersonal. Exactly what it needed to be for a commercial photography shoot, exactly what it shouldn't be for a wedding venue that my family thought they owned. I'd already booked a room at the Harborview Hotel, a small boutique property directly across the bay from my beach house. From the 5th floor, I'd have a clear view of everything that unfolded. I wasn't sure why I needed to watch, but I knew I did. Maybe because I needed to see it actually happen to believe it was real. Maybe because after a lifetime of being invisible, I wanted to witness the moment I finally became impossible to ignore. Before I left the house that final time, I walked through each room, slowly touching walls I'd painted, running my hand along the kitchen counter I'd chosen, looking out at the ocean view I'd bought for myself. This house had saved me after my divorce. It had given me a place to remember who I was when I wasn't performing the role everyone expected. It had taught me that I was capable of creating beauty, of making a space that reflected my own values and desires rather than someone else's vision of what I should want. I stood at the front door with my hand on the knob, looking back at the empty rooms. "I'm sorry for what's about to happen to you," I whispered to the house, to the walls that had sheltered me, to the space that had helped me rebuild myself. "But thank you for teaching me that I'm worth protecting." I locked the door, tested it twice to make sure it was secure, and walked to my car without looking back. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the ocean stretched out before me like a promise or a threat, I couldn't tell which. The ocean was quiet, too quiet. 2 weeks after I'd emptied my personal belongings from the beach house, my phone started buzzing with notifications. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months were tagging me in Facebook posts, sending me links, asking questions I didn't know how to answer yet. I opened social media with a sense of dread that quickly transformed into something closer to fascination. My mother had launched a full-scale publicity campaign. Her Facebook page, normally reserved for occasional updates about garden club meetings and shared articles about healthy living, had transformed into a wedding announcement center. She'd posted a professional quality photo of my beach house, the deck at sunset, the ocean glittering in the background, the architectural lines of the building perfectly framed. The caption read, "So excited to share that our beautiful Lily will be married at our family's beach house this September. A dream venue for a dream wedding. Stay tuned for more details about this special celebration." The post had over 300 likes and dozens of comments. Friends congratulating her, acquaintances asking for invitations, local business owners offering their services. My mother responded to each comment with gracious enthusiasm, playing the role of proud matriarch with practiced ease. But that was just the beginning. Over the next week, she posted almost daily photos of wedding inspiration boards featuring seaside themes, updates about menu selections and floral arrangements, sneak peeks of Lily's dress carefully cropped to maintain mystery while generating excitement. Each post referenced our family's beach house, or our coastal estate, or the venue that's been in our family for generations. Every word was a lie, and every lie was being preserved digitally, shared and reshared across social media networks, building a public narrative that would be impossible to quietly retract. She created a wedding hashtag, #LilyColeBeachDreams. Within days, bridesmaids were using it to post photos of their dresses, Groomsmen were using it to joke about bachelor party plans, guests were using it to share their excitement about attending. The hashtag became an aggregation point for everyone who believed they were attending an elegant family wedding at a property the Whitmans owned and operated. My mother's friend Patricia shared one of the posts with her own commentary. Margaret Whitman has always had such exquisite taste. The beach house has been in their family for years. What a perfect setting for Lily's special day. More lies compounded and amplified, spreading through social networks like ripples across water. I watched it all from a distance, screenshotting particularly egregious claims, saving posts to a folder on my laptop. Each false statement was evidence documentation of exactly how thoroughly my mother had claimed ownership of something that had never been hers. Then 3 weeks before the wedding, my mother's campaign reached a new level. A regional lifestyle magazine called Coastal Elegance contacted her about featuring the wedding in their society section. I learned about it when my mother posted a photo of herself at a coffee shop laptop open with the caption, "Exciting interview today with Coastal Elegance magazine about Lily's upcoming wedding, so honored to share our family's story." The magazine published their feature 2 weeks before the ceremony. Someone sent me a link and I read it over my lunch break, my sandwich growing cold on my desk as I absorbed every word. The article was titled, "A Coastal Love Story, The Whitman Cole Wedding." It featured exterior photos of my beach house, the architecture highlighted in golden afternoon light. The writer had interviewed my mother extensively, and Margaret's quotes were masterful exercises in fiction presented as fact. "Our beach house has been in the family for generations," my mother was quoted as saying. "It's a place where we've celebrated so many important moments together. When Lily got engaged, we knew immediately this was where she should marry. Family tradition is so important to us, we believe in supporting each other, being present for life's beautiful moments." The article went on to describe Margaret as the gracious matriarch of the Whitman family, praised her dedication to family values, and painted a picture of Lily and Ethan as the perfect couple supported by generations of family love and tradition. And there was a paragraph about how the Whitman family had lovingly maintained the beach property, using it for intimate family gatherings and important celebrations. Every sentence was a carefully constructed lie, and now it was published in a glossy magazine with regional distribution preserved in both print and digital formats, impossible to simply delete or deny. I read the article 3 times, then saved the PDF to multiple locations. I sent a copy to Marilyn with a short message, "The evidence keeps building itself." She replied within minutes, "This is actually perfect. She's creating her own paper trail. When this falls apart, she won't be able to claim it was a private family misunderstanding. She's made it very public." By the time the wedding week arrived, the event had been documented across so many platforms that it felt less like a private ceremony and more like a media event. The magazine article had been shared hundreds of times. The wedding hashtag had accumulated over 1,000 posts. A wedding website that Lily had created featured photos of my beach house alongside details about the ceremony timeline and directions to what it called the Whitman Estate. 200 guests had received invitations with my address printed on expensive cardstock. Those same guests had been told through multiple channels that they were attending a wedding at a family property hosted by the gracious Whitman family at their beloved coastal home. Margaret had been so eager to claim credit, so hungry for social recognition and the validation of hosting a society wedding, that she'd created an irrefutable public record of her assumptions and lies. She'd built an entire narrative around ownership. She didn't have traditions that didn't exist, and family closeness that was purely performative. When everything collapsed, and it would collapse in exactly 5 days, there would be no way to quietly walk it back. No way to spin the story as a simple misunderstanding or private family disagreement. No way to control the narrative when 200 confused guests and a lifestyle magazine that had featured the wedding would all be asking questions she couldn't answer. She'd wanted an audience for Lily's perfect wedding, wanted witnesses to the Whitman family's elegance and sophistication and gracious living. She'd worked so hard to make sure everyone was watching, everyone was paying attention, everyone knew about the beautiful celebration at the family's coastal estate. They wanted an audience. They'd get one. 1 week before the wedding, I drove to the beach house to check that everything was ready for Coastal Productions' arrival. The contract specified they'd take possession Friday evening, but I wanted to do a final walkthrough, make sure I hadn't left anything personal behind, verify that the house was in pristine condition. I let myself in and immediately sensed something was different. There were fresh footprints on the hardwood floor, still slightly visible where someone had tracked in sand from the beach. A faint scent of perfume lingered in the air, Lily's signature fragrance, something floral and expensive that our mother had bought her for Christmas. I walked through the main floor and found evidence of their visit everywhere. Lily had left fabric swatches on the dining table, little squares of blush pink and ivory arranged beside photos torn from bridal magazines. There were measurement notes scribbled on a pad of paper diagrams showing where they planned to position chairs for the ceremony. In the kitchen, someone had opened cabinets and rearranged my dishes, probably calculating how much servingware would be needed for 200 guests. The master bedroom told the fuller story. Lily's wedding dress bag hung on the back of the closet door, the garment presumably inside for some kind of fitting or photograph. Tissue paper littered the bed. A pair of her shoes sat on the floor near the window, positioned as if she'd been standing there looking out at the ocean, imagining her wedding day view. I walked into the master bathroom, and that's when I saw it. The engagement ring sat on the marble counter near the sink, catching the late afternoon light streaming through the window. It was a substantial piece, a round solitaire diamond in what looked like a platinum-setting classic and elegant. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it, watching how the stone caught and refracted the light. Something about it seemed strange, though I couldn't immediately identify what bothered me. The stone was almost too clear, too perfect, with a brilliance that seemed slightly off compared to other diamonds I'd seen. The setting was expensive, the metalwork was detailed and well-crafted, but the stone itself had an almost artificial quality, like something trying just a little too hard to look real. I stood there holding my sister's engagement ring and felt a creeping sense of unease. Either Lily had forgotten it in her rush to leave, or she'd left it intentionally, planning to retrieve it later. Either way, I had it now, and the questions forming in my mind refused to be ignored. The next morning, I took the ring to Maxwell & Sons, a reputable jewelry store downtown that had been in business for over 40 years. I walked in carrying the ring in a small velvet pouch and approached the counter with what I hoped looked like casual interest. "I'm thinking about purchasing a ring similar to this one," I told the elderly jeweler who greeted me. "Could you tell me about the quality and give me a sense of value?" He was a kind-faced man with wire-rimmed glasses and the careful movements of someone who'd spent decades handling precious things. He took the ring, examined it briefly with his naked eye, then pulled out a jeweler's loupe and studied it under magnification for what felt like a very long time. When he looked up, his expression was apologetic. "Ma'am, I'm not sure what you were told about this piece, but I need to be honest with you. This isn't a diamond. It's cubic zirconia high-quality CZ, but synthetic nonetheless. The setting appears to be real platinum, probably worth $200 or so for the metalwork. But the stone itself is worth maybe $15. Someone went to some effort to make this look like an expensive engagement ring, but it's essentially costume jewelry in a nice setting." My stomach dropped, a physical sensation like the floor had shifted beneath me. "You're certain?" "Absolutely certain." He pulled out a printed form and began filling it out. "I can give you a written appraisal if you'd like documentation." "Was this ring represented to you as genuine?" "It's complicated," I said. "Yes, please. I'd like the written appraisal." I left the jewelry store 20 minutes later with an official document stating that the ring contained a cubic zirconia stone worth approximately $15 and a platinum setting worth approximately $200. Total value, $215. A real diamond of that size and apparent quality would have cost somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000. I sat in my car in the parking lot and let the implications wash over me. Either Ethan had deliberately given Lily a fake engagement ring hoping she'd never discover the deception, or he'd bought the best ring he could afford and hoped no one would look too closely. Either scenario suggested financial problems that contradicted everything about his carefully constructed image as a successful wealth management professional. That evening, I opened my laptop and began researching Ethan Cole with the kind of focus I usually reserved for analyzing financial reports at work. His LinkedIn profile listed impressive credentials: finance degree from a respectable university, series of positions at investment firms with vague titles like Senior Wealth Consultant and Portfolio Strategy Advisor. But when I clicked through to the companies, half of them no longer existed, and the other half had no record of him in their employee directories. His Instagram showed a carefully curated life of luxury. Photos at expensive restaurants, golf courses that required membership, resort vacations in tropical locations. But when I ran reverse image searches on several photos, I discovered they were older than they appeared. Some dated back 5 or 6 years, being recycled and reposted to maintain the illusion of current affluence. One photo of him at an exclusive club turned out to be from someone else's account, reposted without attribution. I moved to public records, the kind of information anyone can access with enough patience and the right search terms. That's where the real story emerged. 2 eviction notices from luxury apartment buildings in the past 3 years, both for non-payment of rent. Multiple liens against his name from creditors, credit card companies, a luxury car dealership, a country club demanding payment for unpaid dues. Most damning of all, a bankruptcy filing from 4 years ago listing debts of over $200,000. Ethan Cole wasn't a successful wealth manager. He was a man drowning in debt, desperately maintaining the appearance of success, while everything collapsed around him. He was marrying Lily not because he loved her, but because he needed access to what he assumed was her family's money and social connections. And my mother so focused on how good he looked in photos, and how impressive his resume appeared on paper, either hadn't bothered to verify any of it, or had chosen to ignore the warning signs because he fit the image she wanted to project. I saved everything: screenshots, records, the jeweler's appraisal, and added them to the growing folder of documentation I'd been accumulating for weeks. The ring wasn't the only thing that was fake. 5 days before the wedding, I received the email I'd been waiting for. The subject line read, "Coastal Productions, Location Shoot Confirmation." I opened it sitting at my desk at work, my heart beating faster despite the calm I'd been maintaining for weeks. The email was thorough and professional. Daniel Reeves confirmed that his crew would arrive at the beach house at 6 o'clock Saturday morning for their scheduled shoot. He outlined the scope of the project: a 15-person crew, professional lighting and camera equipment, grip trucks for gear transport, and most importantly, private security personnel who would be stationed at the property entrance to ensure the shoot proceeded without disruption. He noted that local police had been formally notified about temporary road access considerations and would have officers in the area as a courtesy to manage any traffic issues. The production manager thanked me for my cooperation and confirmed that the $5,000 rental payment had been deposited into my account 3 weeks prior, as stipulated in the contract. Everything was documented, time-stamped, official. There was no ambiguity, no room for misunderstanding. The beach house would be under exclusive control of Coastal Productions, LLC, for the entire weekend, and I, as property owner, had no authority to access it during that time. I read the email twice, then forwarded it to Marilyn with a message containing only 2 words: "It's done." She replied within minutes, "See you on the other side." That evening, I began the process of moving out. I'd already removed most of my personal belongings weeks ago, but there were still small items scattered throughout the house, the kind of things you don't notice until you're specifically looking for them. I packed my grandmother's jewelry box, the one that had sat on my dresser since I'd inherited it. I took down the few remaining photographs from the wall's images of places I'd traveled alone, moments I'd captured when I was learning to exist independently. I gathered my journals from the desk drawer in the library, years of private thoughts I'd never want strangers to stumble across. The house felt increasingly empty as I worked transforming from a home into something more neutral, more anonymous. Exactly what it needed to be for a commercial photography location. I cleaned obsessively, wiping down counters, vacuuming floors, making sure everything was pristine. Not because Coastal Productions required it, but because some part of me needed to leave the house perfect, needed to prove I'd been a good steward of this space, even as I prepared to use it as a weapon. On the kitchen counter, I left a single white envelope. Inside was a spare key and a note on my personal stationery. Daniel, key for Coastal Productions crew. My cell number is below if you need anything. Thank you for your professionalism. Tara Whitman. Simple businesslike, the kind of note any responsible property owner would leave for a legitimate renter. The next morning, 4 days before the wedding, I loaded the last boxes into my car. I did a final walkthrough, checking that I hadn't forgotten anything, that every room was ready. The house looked beautiful in the early light sun streaming through the large windows, the ocean visible from nearly every room. For a moment, I felt a pang of something like grief, not for what I was about to do, but for the innocence I'd had when I'd first bought this place, when I'd believed I could build something my family couldn't touch. My mother called that evening as I was unpacking in my temporary hotel room. I let it ring 3 times before answering, steadying my voice to sound casual and unconcerned. "Tara, darling, I wanted to confirm a few final details about Saturday," she said, her voice bright with the excitement of someone whose plans are all falling into place. "The caterers will arrive at 10, the florist at 11. I'll need you to be there to let people in, show them where everything goes." "I'm actually going to be out of town this weekend," I said, keeping my tone light and apologetic. "I forgot I had committed to this work trip weeks ago. But you have a key, so you should be fine to coordinate everything." There was a brief pause. "Out of town." "This weekend, Tara, this is your sister's wedding." "I know, and I feel terrible about the timing, but this was scheduled months ago and I can't get out of it." The lie came easily, smoothly. I'd practiced it enough times in my head. "I'm sure you'll do a beautiful job with the setup. You've planned everything so perfectly." She made a small noise of irritation but couldn't argue too forcefully without revealing that she'd never actually asked me to host the wedding in the first place. "Well, I suppose we'll manage. What time will you be back?" "The ceremony starts at 4. "Late Sunday," I said. "I'm really sorry to miss it." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear her recalculating, trying to decide if this was worth a fight. Finally, she said, "That's very disappointing, Tara, but I suppose family emergencies happen. We'll celebrate when you return." I hung up and sat on the hotel bed staring at my phone. She'd accepted my absence without much protest because she'd already gotten what she wanted: access to the house. My presence had never been the point. The Harborview Hotel was a small boutique property on the opposite side of the bay, about 2 miles from my beach house as the crow flies. I'd chosen it specifically for the view. My 5th-floor room had a small balcony with an unobstructed sightline across the water to the cliff where my house sat. I'd brought binoculars, my laptop, my phone fully charged. I'd prepared to document everything, though I wasn't entirely sure why I needed to watch. Perhaps because after a lifetime of being invisible, I wanted to witness the moment I finally became impossible to ignore. As sunset approached on Thursday evening, 2 days before the wedding, I stood on the balcony with my binoculars and watched a silver Lexus pull up to my beach house. Even from this distance, I recognized my mother's car. I adjusted the focus and saw her get out, walk to the front door, let herself in with the key I'd given her years ago. Through the windows, I could see her moving from room to room, gesturing as if she were talking to someone, probably on the phone with Patricia or one of her other friends, narrating her vision for the space. She walked out onto the deck and stood at the railing, her posture straight and confident, surveying the view like a queen surveying her kingdom. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. Margaret was standing in a house she'd never owned, planning an event that would never happen, congratulating herself on her successful manipulation, completely unaware that in 48 hours, everything she'd built would collapse under the weight of assumptions she'd never bothered to verify. I watched her for 20 minutes before she got back in her car and drove away. The sun set over the water, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and I felt perfectly calm. No second thoughts, no last-minute guilt, no impulse to call it all off. I'd watch it all from across the water. I woke at 5:30 on Saturday morning without needing an alarm. My body knew somehow that this was the day everything would change. I made coffee in the small machine the hotel provided, stood on the balcony in the pre-dawn darkness, and watched the sky slowly lighten over the ocean. The water was calm, almost unnaturally still, like the world was holding its breath. Across the bay, my beach house sat dark and silent, waiting. I wondered if Lily was awake yet, if she was experiencing the same nervous anticipation brides are supposed to feel on their wedding morning. I tried to imagine what was happening at my mother's house, the controlled chaos of preparation, the excitement building toward a moment that would never arrive as planned. My phone buzzed with the text at 6:15. I'd turned off all notifications except for messages from Marilyn. Her text was brief. "Crew is en route. Are you ready?" I typed back, "As ready as I'll ever be." Through my binoculars, I watched 3 large trucks pull up to the beach house at exactly 6 o'clock. Even from across the water, I could see the efficiency of the operation. Men and women in dark clothing began unloading equipment, light stands, camera cases, what looked like audio gear and reflectors. They moved with the practiced coordination of people who'd done this hundreds of times before. 2 vehicles with coastal security emblazoned on their sides pulled up behind the trucks. 4 security personnel got out, all wearing professional uniforms, all carrying what I assumed were radios and other equipment. They stationed themselves at the property entrance, while the crew continued setting up. A police car arrived shortly after, not with sirens or urgency, but with the casual authority of routine official business. I watched an officer get out and speak with the production manager, both of them reviewing paperwork, the officer nodding and taking notes. This was the pre-arranged notification, the courtesy check-in that made everything official and above board. Within 30 minutes, yellow caution tape had been strung across the property entrance. Large professional signs appeared: "Film production in progress, no unauthorized access, Coastal Productions, LLC." The security personnel took positions at key points, one at the driveway entrance, others near the house itself. I watched the production manager walk through the property with a tablet marking positions, taking photos, directing crew members to different locations. To anyone observing, this was clearly a legitimate commercial operation, properly permitted and professionally executed. Across town, in a house I couldn't see, but could imagine with perfect clarity, a different kind of production was unfolding. I knew my mother would have been awake since dawn, her energy manic with the excitement of orchestrating her perfect day. I pictured Lily sitting in front of mirrors, surrounded by makeup artists and hairstylists, bridesmaids in matching robes, drinking champagne too early in the morning, everyone performing the rituals of wedding preparation that had been performed millions of times before. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Lily sent at 9:45. "Can't wait to celebrate at your beautiful house. Thank you for being the best sister. I wish you could be here for the getting ready part, but I know you'll be thinking of us. Love you." I stared at that message for a long time. The genuine warmth in it, the gratitude, the affection, it was real, even if it was based on completely false assumptions. Lily truly believed I'd given her this gift, truly thought I was missing the ceremony because of some unavoidable work obligation, truly had no idea what was about to happen. I turned off my phone completely. I couldn't risk any calls or messages once things began, couldn't afford the distraction or the temptation to intervene. By 10 o'clock, the film crew at the beach house had transformed the property into an active production site. Lighting equipment stood positioned on the deck, cables ran along the walkways. Crew members moved purposefully between stations. It looked busy, official, completely legitimate, because it was. At 10:30, I saw the first wedding vehicle appear on the coastal road. A white luxury sedan, probably a rental, moving slowly as if the driver was looking for an address. Then another car behind it, and another. Within minutes there was a small procession of vehicles, expensive cars carrying people dressed in formal attire, flowers visible through some windows, the unmistakable appearance of a wedding party en route to a ceremony. I adjusted my binoculars and saw the lead car was my mother's silver Lexus. Even from this distance I could see her in the driver's seat, phone pressed to her ear, animated and confident. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of white fabric in the back seat of the second car, Lily in her wedding dress. The security guard at the property entrance stepped into the middle of the driveway, holding up his hand in the universal gesture for stop. I watched Margaret's car slow, then stop. She got out, and even without being able to hear, I could read her body language confusion shifting to irritation, the imperious posture of someone demanding to know what was going on. More cars were arriving now, pulling up behind the lead vehicles. People were getting out, bridesmaids in blush pink dresses, groomsmen in dark suits, guests who'd arrived early to help with setup. Everyone looked confused, standing on the road looking toward the house that was blocked off with yellow tape and security personnel. The production manager walked over to speak with Margaret. I could see him gesturing to the signs showing her paperwork explaining something. I watched my mother's face change, saw the moment her confusion transformed into rage. She started yelling. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see her pointing at the house at the security guard, gesturing wildly with the kind of fury I'd seen directed at me countless times throughout my life. The production manager remained calm, professional, his posture suggesting he was simply explaining facts, not engaging emotionally. More cars were arriving. The coastal road was becoming congested with wedding guests who'd followed their GPS to this address, all of them pulling up to find yellow caution tape and security personnel instead of white chairs and flower arrangements. I saw someone, a bridesmaid, I thought, helping Lily out of the second car. Even from across the water, the white wedding dress was unmistakable. Lily stood on the road in her $8,000 gown looking toward the house, her posture suggesting bewilderment. The production manager pulled out his phone, presumably calling for additional support. The security personnel had moved into defensive positions, creating a barrier between the growing crowd and the property. Margaret was still yelling now, pointing at various people in the crowd, probably trying to rally them to her cause, to her version of events, where this was all a terrible mistake that needed to be immediately corrected. Then I saw the first police cruiser arrive. The police cruiser pulled up slowly. No sirens, no urgency. Just the calm authority of law enforcement responding to a call about a disturbance. Through my binoculars, I watched the officer get out and approach the growing crowd at my property entrance. He spoke briefly with the security guard, who pointed toward Margaret and then toward the production manager. Margaret saw the police arrive, and her entire demeanor changed. She straightened, smoothed her lavender dress, and strode toward the officer with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything by a person in uniform. I couldn't hear her words, but I could read her body language perfectly. The imperious tilt of her head, the sweeping gestures toward the house, the expression that said she expected immediate compliance with whatever she was demanding. The officer listened, his face professionally neutral. He pulled out a notepad and began taking notes. I saw him ask Margaret something. Watched her respond with what looked like increasing frustration. She was gesturing more wildly now, pointing at the security personnel at the yellow caution tape at the house itself. The officer turned to the production manager, who walked over carrying a tablet and a folder. Through my binoculars, I watched him show the officer documents I knew exactly what they were because I'd signed them myself. The rental contract, notarized and official. The property permit, the insurance documentation, all of it bearing my signature as the legal property owner, all of it establishing Coastal Productions' legitimate right to exclusive use of the premises. The officer took his time reviewing everything. He made notes, asked questions, examined the paperwork with the careful attention of someone who understood that what he documented now might end up in a legal proceeding later. Margaret stood nearby, visibly agitated, interrupting several times only to be politely but firmly asked to wait. Behind her, the scene was descending into chaos. More wedding guests had arrived, finding the coastal road congested with stopped vehicles. People in formal attire were climbing out of cars, looking confused, calling out questions that no one could answer. I saw bridesmaids clustered together, phones out, already filming. Groomsmen stood in awkward groups, uncertain whether to help or retreat. The officer finished reviewing the documents and turned back to Margaret. Even from across the water, I could see the exact moment when he delivered the verdict. Margaret's face went from crimson to pale in seconds. She started talking rapidly, gesturing clearly, arguing with whatever he'd told her. The officer remained calm, his posture suggesting he was simply stating facts not open to negotiation. "Ma'am, I need you to step back." I imagined him saying the standard police phrasing for someone who was about to cross a line. Margaret didn't step back. Instead, she turned and screamed toward the cars behind her, loud enough that I could almost hear it across the water. That's when Lily emerged from the second vehicle. She looked like something from a fairy tale gone wrong. The $8,000 wedding dress, brilliant white in the late morning sun. Her hair and makeup perfect flowers in her hand, standing on the side of a coastal road, staring at yellow caution tape and security guards instead of the elegant ceremony she'd been promised. Even from this distance, I could see her face crumpling, the careful makeup beginning to run as she started crying. Two bridesmaids rushed to her side, both of them holding phones, both of them filming even as they tried to comfort her. The photographer Margaret had hired a professional I recognized from his portfolio on his website, had his camera up, and was shooting everything. Not the romantic getting-ready moments, or the emotional ceremony he'd been hired to capture, but the collapse of a wedding in real time, the kind of dramatic images that would probably end up in his portfolio as examples of unpredictable location challenges. Margaret was on her phone now, pacing in tight circles, her free hand pressed against her forehead. She was calling me, I knew, just as she'd probably been calling for the past hour. Every call went straight to voicemail. My phone powered off and sitting on the hotel nightstand. I watched her try to push past the security guard one more time. He stepped sideways, blocking her path, his voice presumably calm but unyielding. The officer moved closer, one hand resting on his belt, in that universal police posture that says the situation is about to escalate if people don't start cooperating. More guests were arriving now, at least 50 cars backed up along the coastal road. People were getting out, walking forward to see what the delay was, pulling out phones to film the spectacle. I saw someone, maybe a groomsman, trying to direct traffic, waving cars to turn around, but the road was too narrow and there were too many vehicles. Ethan appeared from somewhere in the crowd, still in his tuxedo, phone pressed to his ear. He wasn't rushing to Lily's side. He wasn't trying to comfort his sobbing bride. He was standing apart from everyone, having an animated conversation with whoever was on the other end of his call, looking more annoyed than devastated. Even in the middle of his own wedding disaster, he was somewhere else entirely. Margaret was screaming now, I could tell by the way her mouth moved, the violent gestures she was making toward the house. The officer said something to her that made her stop mid-sentence. He pointed toward his police car, then toward the road leading away from the property. The universal message was clear. Leave now or leave in handcuffs. I saw my father for the first time then, Richard, emerging from one of the vehicles, looking older than I remembered, his shoulders hunched as he walked toward Margaret. He put a hand on her arm, trying to calm her, but she shook him off violently, still yelling at the officer, at the security personnel, at anyone who would listen. The production crew had stopped working and were standing in clusters near the house, watching the drama unfold at their work site. Some of them had phones out too, documenting this bizarre disruption to their scheduled shoot. The production manager was speaking with another police officer who'd arrived back up, I assumed, given the size of the crowd and the potential for things to turn ugly. Lily had collapsed into a bridesmaid's arms, her beautiful dress pooling around her on the asphalt, her shoulders shaking with sobs that I could almost feel from across the water. Another bridesmaid was on her phone, probably canceling vendors or maybe posting updates to social media where the wedding hashtag #LilyColeBeachDreams was probably already filling with confused and mocking commentary. I watched it all through my binoculars, my hands steady, my breathing calm. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a strange hollowness mixed with relief. This wasn't about hurting them. It was about finally, definitively proving that my boundaries were real, that my property was mine, that my no had teeth whether they'd chosen to hear it or not. Margaret was being escorted back toward her car, now the officer walking beside her, his posture making it clear this wasn't a request. She was still talking, still arguing, but she was moving. Richard followed behind her, his head down, defeated. The crowd of guests was slowly beginning to disperse, people walking back to their cars, phones out, already sharing the story of the wedding that never happened. Some looked sympathetic toward Lily. Others looked angry. A few were laughing, the kind of nervous laughter people make when witnessing someone else's public humiliation. And just like that, the music stopped. What followed was 3 hours of watching my mother try to control something that was already beyond her reach. From my hotel room across the water, I witnessed her desperate attempts to salvage what she'd built, each effort only deepening the disaster. She was on her phone, constantly pacing along the roadside in her lavender dress and expensive jewelry, making call after call. I couldn't hear her conversations, but I could imagine them perfectly. The caterer, first probably trying to redirect 200 plates of food to some alternative location. I knew the catering company she'd hired. They were professionals who required detailed contracts and advance payment. They wouldn't simply pack up an elaborate reception meal and drive it to a public beach pavilion without renegotiating terms, without additional fees, without guarantees. They wouldn't be left holding the bill. Through my binoculars, I watched her face cycle through expressions pleading, then angry, then desperate. She hung up and immediately made another call. The florist I guessed already at the beach house, setting up arrangements that now had nowhere to go. Those flowers had cost thousands of dollars. I'd overheard Margaret bragging about the imported peonies, the spray roses, the delicate installations that required professional setup. The florist would want additional payment to break down and relocate. Everything costs Margaret hadn't budgeted for because she'd never planned for this contingency. More guests kept arriving throughout the late morning and early afternoon, following GPS directions to an address they'd been given weeks ago. Each new arrival led to the same confusion cars pulling up to find yellow tape and security personnel, well-dressed people emerging, and immediately pulling out phones, the ripple of gossip spreading through the growing crowd. Some guests tried to approach the house, were stopped by security, argued briefly, then gave up and returned to their vehicles. Others stood in groups on the road, talking in clusters, their body language shifting from confused to amused to sympathetic, depending on whose version of events they believed. I watched a group of younger guests, probably Lily's friends, decide to abandon the wedding entirely and salvage their Saturday afternoon. They posed for photos on the roadside, still in their cocktail dresses and suits, holding up champagne bottles someone had retrieved from a car trunk. One of them was clearly posting to Instagram because I saw her arranging the group, directing people to smile, holding up her phone for the perfect angle. The caption would probably be something wry about venue disasters and making the best of bad situations, all of it tagged with the hashtag my mother had created to document her perfect day. Lily. Cole Beach Dreams was probably filling with posts my mother never imagined, not elegant ceremony photos and romantic sunset portraits, but confused guests, shots of yellow caution tape, comments asking what happened and why and who was responsible. Lily remained in the back seat of a car, still wearing her wedding dress, visible through the window, even from my distance. I watched bridesmaids rotate in and out, bringing her water tissues, trying to comfort her. But I could see their body language changing as the afternoon wore on, the initial sympathy giving way to something else. This would be their story now, the wedding disaster they'd witnessed, the tale they'd tell at parties for years. Poor Lily, yes, but also what a spectacle. What drama did you hear? What the groom said Ethan was the most revealing figure in the entire scene. He stood apart from the main group, phone constantly at his ear, his posture aggressive and angry. When Lily finally emerged from the car and approached him, I could see her reaching for his arm, see her mouth moving in what looked like pleading. He pulled away. The conversation was brief and clearly heated. Even without audio, I could read the body language, Lily asking for help, for partnership, for him to fix this somehow. Ethan responding with anger, with blame, with distance. He gestured violently toward the house, toward Margaret, toward the chaos in general. His mouth moved in what looked like a sharp cutting statement. Lily stepped back as if she'd been physically struck. A bridesmaid moved closer, and I saw her mouth the words that would later be repeated in whispers and social media posts. "Did you hear how he just talked to her?" But Margaret was the centerpiece of the disaster, the eye of the storm she'd created. Unable to accept that this was happening, unwilling to acknowledge any responsibility, she began constructing an alternative narrative in real time. I watched her gather a group of relatives and family friends, saw her talking animatedly, gesturing toward the house and then toward the sky as if invoking some higher authority. She was telling them about me I knew, explaining that her troubled older daughter had sabotaged the wedding out of jealousy, that I'd always been unstable and vindictive, that this proved everything she'd ever said about my character. The house that I'd stolen from the family, the mental illness she'd always suspected, the way I'd resented Lily's happiness since we were children. Some people nodded along believing her, or at least pretending to, but others I could see them exchanging glances, their faces skeptical. There were people in that crowd who'd known our family for decades, who'd watched Margaret treat me like an afterthought, who remembered the scholarship I'd given up and the bedroom I'd been moved out of, and the countless small cruelties inflicted under the banner of family. One older woman, I thought it might be my mother's cousin Helen, said something that made Margaret's face flush darker. Helen shook her head slowly, said something else, then walked away toward her car. I wished desperately that I could hear what had been said, but the body language told the story clearly enough. Not everyone was buying Margaret's version of events. Richard stood on the periphery of everything, aging visibly with each passing hour. He wasn't defending Margaret, wasn't supporting her narrative, but he wasn't contradicting it either. When a younger cousin approached him, I recognized James, my father's nephew, and asked what happened. Richard could only shake his head. His shoulders were slumped, his face gray, the picture of a man who'd spent decades avoiding conflict and was now drowning in the consequences of that avoidance. The police remained on site, not intervening, but present a reminder that this was now a matter of legal boundaries and property rights, not family drama that could be negotiated away. The production crew had gone back to work, their schedule delayed, but not derailed, setting up shots and adjusting equipment, while the wedding chaos continued to unfold at the property entrance. By 3 o'clock, most of the guests had dispersed. Some had gone home, others to restaurants or bars to salvage their Saturday afternoon. The road was clearer now, just a few core family members remaining: Margaret and Richard, Lily and Ethan, a handful of bridesmaids, a few relatives who felt obligated to stay. Lily was no longer crying. She sat on the bumper of a car, her expensive dress dirty at the hem, her professional hair and makeup ruined, staring at nothing with the blank expression of someone in shock. Ethan was gone. I'd watched him get into his car 20 minutes earlier and drive away without a word to his bride. Margaret was still on her phone, still trying to control something, anything. But her movements were slower now, less manic. The reality was setting in even for her. There would be no wedding today, no ceremony, no reception, no photographs of her perfect family celebration. I stood on my hotel balcony, binoculars in hand, watching the aftermath of what I'd set in motion. I felt no triumph, but I felt no guilt either. Just a strange, quiet satisfaction that after 35 years my silence had finally spoken louder than any words I could have said. For the first time, silence served me. I stayed at the hotel for 2 days after the wedding, watching the story spread across the internet like wildfire catching dry brush. By Sunday morning, my phone, which I'd finally turned back on, was flooded with notifications. Texts from old college friends asking if I was okay. Emails from distant relatives demanding to know what I'd done. Missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably reporters who'd somehow gotten my contact information. The first video appeared on TikTok within hours of the wedding disaster. Someone had filmed the entire confrontation: Margaret screaming at the security guard, Lily sobbing in her wedding dress, guests standing around, confused police trying to manage the situation. The caption read, "Bride's wedding shut down by police because the family beach house wasn't actually theirs." The video had been viewed over 2 million times when I first saw it Sunday afternoon. The comments section was a battlefield. Some people defended me, a sister they'd never met. Good for her setting boundaries. Narcissistic family finally got consequences. The older sister is a legend. Others condemned me with equal passion. How cruel to ruin your sister's wedding. This is psychotic behavior. Imagine being this vindictive. Think pieces started appearing on websites about family dynamics, toxic parents, the golden child, and scapegoat relationship. We'd become a case study, our private family dysfunction dissected by strangers who felt entitled to judge situations they understood only through 60-second video clips. YouTube creators made reaction videos, some sympathetic to me, others horrified by what they called my cruelty. One video titled, "When Family Boundaries Go Too Far," had 500,000 views. Another called, "Narcissistic Parents, the Whitman Wedding Disaster Explained," approached the situation with more nuance, interviewing a family therapist about enmeshment and exploitation patterns. The Whitman family, my family, had become internet entertainment. Our worst moment, packaged and consumed by millions of people eating lunch at their desks or scrolling through their phones before bed. I watched it all with a strange detachment, as if I were reading about someone else's life. This was the price of my boundary, the cost of finally saying no in a way that couldn't be ignored. I'd known it would be public. My mother had made sure of that with her social media campaign and magazine interview. I just hadn't fully understood what public meant in the age of viral videos and hashtag trends. Then on Tuesday morning, 3 days after the wedding, my mother made her move. Her Facebook post appeared at 9 a.m, carefully composed to maximize sympathy. The profile picture had been changed to a soft focus photo of her looking vulnerable and tired. The post itself was a masterpiece of manipulation. I've been keeping something private because I didn't want to overshadow Lily's special day, but given recent events, I feel I need to share. 3 months ago, I was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. I've been preparing quietly for treatment, not wanting to burden my daughters during what should have been a joyful time. The stress of Saturday's events, orchestrated by my troubled daughter Tara, has significantly worsened my condition. I start chemotherapy next week. Please keep me and my family in your prayers during this difficult time. Within hours, the post had thousands of reactions, hearts and crying emojis and praying hands. Comments poured in, "Praying for you, Margaret. You're so brave. I can't believe your daughter would do this to you when you're fighting cancer." Friends organized meal trains. Someone set up a GoFundMe for her medical expenses that raised $8,000 in the first day. The local news picked up the story. I watched a segment that evening where my mother sat in her living room, tissues in hand, talking about her diagnosis and her heartbreak over her daughter's betrayal. She looked appropriately frail, her voice weak but determined, the picture of a brave woman fighting for her life while dealing with family cruelty. I sat on my hotel bed watching her performance and felt nothing but cold recognition. Of course she would do this. Of course she would weaponize a fake illness when her other manipulations failed. This was who she'd always been. I'd just never seen it displayed so publicly before. My phone rang. Marilyn's name appeared on the screen. "Are you seeing this?" she asked without preamble. "The cancer announcement." "Yes." "Do you believe it?" I pulled up my mother's Facebook page and started scrolling backward through her recent posts. "Look at her photos from the past month," I said. 2 weeks ago, she posted pictures from a spa day with Patricia. Last week, she was shopping at Nordstrom. There's a photo of her with multiple shopping bags, caption about treating herself. 10 days ago, she attended a wine tasting event. 3 weeks ago, she went to a charity gala. None of these are activities of someone undergoing cancer treatment or preparing for chemotherapy. Marilyn was quiet for a moment. "She's created a GoFundMe. Already has $8,000 in donations." "That's fraud," Marilyn said, her voice sharp with professional certainty. "If she's collecting money for a medical condition she doesn't have, that's wire fraud. That's a felony." "So what do? We document everything. Every photo she's posted, every public appearance, every social media post, showing her healthy and active during the time she claims to have been sick. We also need to think about how we verify she doesn't have cancer without violating medical privacy laws. Can't request her medical records, but we can document the circumstantial evidence that contradicts her claims." I spent the next 3 hours creating a detailed timeline. Every Facebook post from the past 3 months, screenshotted and dated. Photos of my mother at social events, at the gym, shopping, dining at expensive restaurants, attending parties. All activities inconsistent with someone seriously ill and preparing for cancer treatment. I documented the GoFundMe page, saved copies of her local news interview, archived everything before it could be deleted or edited. The internet that had been condemning me on Saturday was now rallying around my mother on Tuesday, and she was accepting their sympathy while collecting money for a disease she didn't have. The cruelty of it was almost impressive in its audacity. Wednesday morning, I returned home to my apartment in Portland. I'd been away for nearly a week, and my mailbox was overflowing with accumulated letters and packages. I sorted through bills and advertisements, prepared to throw most of it away. Then a letter arrived with my grandmother's name on it. The envelope was cream-colored heavy stock with my grandmother's name embossed in elegant script on the return address. Catherine Whitman, followed by the address of a law office I didn't recognize. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, unable to imagine what correspondence could be arriving from a woman who'd been dead for 5 years. Inside was a cover letter on official letterhead from Howard Chen, attorney at law, and beneath it, a thick document bound with a blue legal backing. I sat down on my couch before reading some instinct telling me I'd need to be seated for whatever this contained. The cover letter was dated just 3 days ago, written in response to what Mr. Chen described as recent news coverage of your family situation. He explained that he'd been Catherine Whitman's attorney for over 30 years, handling her estate planning, real estate transactions, and personal legal matters. When she died 5 years ago, Margaret had been named executor of the estate with clear instructions to distribute copies of the will to all beneficiaries within 30 days of Catherine's death. I retired shortly after your grandmother's passing, Mr. Chen wrote, and assumed that Mrs. Margaret Whitman had fulfilled her legal obligations as executor. However, upon seeing recent media coverage involving your family, and specifically the beach property your grandmother purchased, I felt compelled to review my files. It appears that you were never provided with your copy of the will, which represents a serious breach of fiduciary duty on your mother's part. Enclosed is the original document, which I believe will clarify matters considerably regarding the beach house and other assets. My heart was pounding as I unfolded the will itself. It was a formal legal document, notarized and witnessed, dated 6 months before my grandmother's death. The language was precise legal, but the meaning was devastatingly clear. Catherine had left 70% of her entire estate to me, not to be split among grandchildren, not held in trust, not contingent on any conditions. 70% directly to Tara Marie Whitman, including, and this was explicitly detailed, full ownership of the beach house property located on the Oregon coast. But it wasn't just the distribution that took my breath away. It was the explanation. Catherine had included a personal statement embedded in the legal document that the lawyer must have helped her craft. I leave the majority of my assets to my granddaughter Tara, because she has shown integrity, independence, and kindness despite being raised by a daughter who values appearance over character. Tara has never asked me for anything, has never manipulated or played games, has never treated love as a commodity to be traded for compliance. The beach house was purchased jointly with Tara when she turned 18, with my intention always being that it would be entirely hers upon my death. This was our private arrangement made without Margaret's knowledge because I knew my daughter would attempt to claim it for herself or use it as leverage to control Tara. I read that paragraph 3 times, my grandmother's voice clear in my mind despite the formal legal language. She'd seen everything. She'd understood exactly what my childhood had been, exactly how Margaret operated, exactly why I'd needed protection. The will continued explaining that the remaining 30% of the estate was divided between Lily, who received 15%, and 2 charities Catherine had supported for decades, which split the final 15%. Margaret's name appeared only once more in the document. To my daughter, Margaret Whitman, I leave my personal jewelry and photograph albums as she has already received substantial financial gifts during my lifetime. Gifts totaling over $200,000, which she squandered on maintaining social status rather than building security. She is to receive no further assets from my estate. $200,000. I'd had no idea my grandmother had given Margaret that much money over the years. No wonder Catherine had been so determined to protect what remained to ensure that at least some of her estate went to someone who would value it for the right reasons. But there was more. Clipped to the back of the will was a separate letter handwritten on my grandmother's personal stationery dated just weeks before her death. My vision blurred with tears as I began to read. My dear Tara, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I hope I got to say goodbye to you properly. But in case I didn't, I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become. I've watched you grow up, bearing the weight of your mother's narcissism, and I've hated every moment that I couldn't protect you from her more directly. But I can protect you now in this way. The beach house has always been yours. I put your name on the deed when you were 18 because I knew Margaret would try to take it after my death. She doesn't know about this arrangement. I told her I'd purchased it as an investment property to rent out. In truth, I purchased it for you as a place you could escape to when your mother's control became unbearable. I've paid all expenses over the years because I wanted you to have it free and clear with no strings attached. Margaret will likely tell you that the house belongs to the family, that you should share it, that you owe her access to it. She will use guilt and obligation and the language of family duty to try to claim what was never hers. Don't let her. The house is my gift to you. The one person in this family who knows the value of something beyond what it costs. You owe them nothing but the truth, Tara. You owe yourself everything, peace, safety, boundaries, a life built on your own terms. Don't let anyone, not even your own mother, convince you otherwise. I love you, my darling girl. I always have. I only wish I'd been braver about protecting you when I was alive. Let this house be my final act of protection. Use it well. Guard it fiercely, and never apologize for taking up space in a world that has tried so hard to make you small. The letter was signed in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting, witnessed and notarized like the will itself. I sat on my couch holding these documents, tears streaming down my face for the first time since the wedding disaster. Not tears of sadness or guilt or regret. Tears of relief, of validation, of finally understanding that at least one person in my family had truly seen me, had truly loved me without conditions or expectations. My grandmother had known. She'd watched Margaret treat me like a servant and Lily like a princess, and she'd quietly, methodically built a protection around me that would last beyond her lifetime. The beach house had never been a simple inheritance. It had been a fortress, a sanctuary. A legally binding declaration that I mattered, that my autonomy mattered, that I deserved something that was wholly mine. And Margaret had hidden this will for 5 years. She'd served as executor, read these words that cut her out of the estate, and explained exactly why, and chosen to pretend it didn't exist. She'd let me believe the house was a general inheritance, had tried to claim it as family property, had planned Lily's wedding there without ever acknowledging that Catherine had specifically, explicitly given it to me with instructions to guard it against exactly this kind of intrusion. I called Marilyn immediately, my voice shaking as I explained what had arrived. She hid the will, Marilyn said, her voice tight with anger. That's not just unethical, Tara. That's illegal. As executor, she had a legal obligation to distribute copies to all beneficiaries. Concealing a will is a serious crime, especially when she personally benefited from others not knowing its contents. What does this mean? It means your mother didn't just lose a wedding venue on Saturday. She lost any possible claim to moral high ground. This proves everything, proves she knew the house was yours. Proves she deliberately hid that fact. Proves she's been lying about family property and traditions. Combined with the fake cancer claim and the GoFundMe fraud, we have a pattern of deception that goes back years. I looked down at the document spread across my coffee table, at my grandmother's handwritten letter, with its message of love and protection. They didn't just lose a wedding, they lost everything. I didn't call ahead. I didn't ask permission. I simply drove to my parents' house the morning after receiving my grandmother's will, the documents in a folder on my passenger seat. My resolve cold and steady. This conversation was 5 years overdue, and it would happen on my terms, not theirs. Margaret answered the door wearing yoga pants and a cashmere sweater. Her hair styled, her makeup perfect. She looked radiant, healthy, the picture of wellness. Not a single sign of the stage 3 ovarian cancer she claimed to be battling. No pallor, no weakness, no physical indication of someone undergoing or preparing for chemotherapy. The woman collecting thousands of dollars in donations for her medical treatment looked better than I'd seen her in years. "Tara," she said, surprise flickering across her face. "I wasn't expecting you." I walked past her into the house without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk, now." She followed me into the dining room where I placed the folder on the table and pulled out my grandmother's will. I set it down carefully, the blue legal backing facing up Catherine's name and the date clearly visible. "Explain this," I said quietly. Margaret's face drained of color so quickly I thought she might faint. She stared at the document like it was something dangerous, something that might bite if she got too close. "Where did you get that?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "From Grandma's lawyer. The one who assumed you'd done your job as executor and distributed copies to all beneficiaries like you were legally required to do. The one who saw news coverage of the wedding disaster and realized you'd hidden this for 5 years. "Tara, you don't understand." She reached for the document, but I pulled it back. "Your grandmother, she was confused at the end. She wasn't thinking clearly. This will, it doesn't reflect what she really wanted. She wrote it 6 months before she died when she was perfectly lucid. It's notarized, witnessed, legally binding. And you know it is because you read it 5 years ago and decided to pretend it didn't exist. That house was supposed to be for the whole family." Margaret's voice was rising, desperation creeping in. "Catherine didn't understand that decisions like that affect everyone. I was protecting the family unit, protecting you and Lily from unnecessary conflict." "You were protecting yourself," I said, my voice hard. "You were furious that she cut you out of the estate and explained exactly why. So you hid the will, lied about the house being family property, and spent 5 years acting like you had any claim to something that was never yours." My father appeared in the doorway, drawn by our raised voices. He looked older, grayer, diminished somehow since the wedding. He took in the scene, the will on the table. Margaret's panicked face, my rigid posture, and something in his expression told me he knew exactly what was happening. "Richard," I said, turning to face him, "did you know about this will?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. My father looked at Margaret, then at me, then down at his shoes. "Yes," he said finally, "I knew." The admission shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow it still hurt. "When?" "Your mother showed it to me the day after Catherine's funeral. She was upset about being excluded from the estate, about what Catherine had written about her. We talked about whether to tell you girls, and I thought maybe it was better to just let things be, let it settle naturally without creating conflict. You advised her to hide it." I said not a question but a statement. "I advised her not to bring it up if it wasn't necessary, to avoid unnecessary family drama. Your mother was grieving feeling rejected by her own mother. I was trying to help her process that without making things worse." "You mean you were avoiding conflict like you've avoided every difficult moment your entire life?" I heard my voice getting sharper, colder. "You knew she was lying about the house. You knew when she planned Lily's wedding there without asking me. You knew, and you said nothing because speaking up would have required you to actually take a stand for once." "I was trying to keep everyone happy," he said weakly. "No, Dad. You were keeping yourself comfortable. There's a difference. Keeping peace would have meant stopping Mom from lying in the first place, from hiding a legal document, from violating her duties as executor. What you did was enable her to commit fraud while you stood by and watched, and now you're calling that peacekeeping." My phone rang, cutting through the tension. Lily's name flashed on the screen. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Tara." Her voice was wrecked, thick with tears. "I need help. Ethan is gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "He left. I haven't heard from him in 3 days. His phone is disconnected. I went to his apartment and it's empty. All his stuff is gone like he was never there. I don't know what to do. Mom won't talk to me. She's too angry about the wedding. Dad won't answer my calls. I don't have anyone else." I looked at Margaret, who was watching me with barely concealed fury, and then at Richard, who was staring at the floor. 5 years of lies, a lifetime of manipulation. And now my sister was falling apart while our parents were more concerned with protecting their own images than helping their daughter. "Come to Mom and Dad's house," I said into the phone. "Right now. We need to talk, all of us." I hung up and looked at my mother. "Lily's on her way. We're going to have a family meeting, and this time we're dealing in truth instead of performance." While we waited, I pulled out my phone and did something I probably should have done days ago. I searched for Ethan Cole on every social media platform, cross-referenced with the information I'd gathered about his fake credentials and financial problems. This time, I found what I'd missed before: a private Instagram account for someone named Sarah Chen. It took 15 minutes of searching through connections and mutual friends before I found a way to view her account through a friend of a friend's profile. And there it was, posted 6 days ago, a photo of Ethan and a beautiful Asian woman in her early 30s, both of them smiling at a restaurant, her hand displaying an engagement ring. The caption read, "Finally ready to announce our engagement, so excited to start this next chapter together." I scrolled back through her feed. Photos of them together going back 6 months. Dinner dates, weekend trips, casual moments that looked far more genuine than anything I'd ever seen between Ethan and Lily. Sarah Chen had a verified account with over 50,000 followers, her bio describing her as a tech entrepreneur and founder of some startup I'd vaguely heard of. She was successful, wealthy, established, everything Ethan had been looking for. He'd been playing both of them, keeping Sarah as his primary option while pursuing Lily as insurance. When the Whitman wedding imploded and became a viral disaster, when it became clear that marrying into our family would bring public humiliation rather than social advancement, he'd simply cut his losses and moved forward with the better prospect. Lily arrived 20 minutes later, her face swollen from crying, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt I recognized from high school. She looked at all of us standing in the dining room and seemed to shrink into herself. "He's engaged to someone else," I said, showing her my phone screen. "He has been for months. You were never his only option, Lily. You were his backup plan." She stared at the photo, and I watched something break in her expression. Not just heartbreak, but recognition. She'd known something was wrong. She'd felt his distance, his disinterest, his performance of affection rather than genuine feeling. She'd just been too invested in the fairy tale to admit what she was seeing. "Mom knew," Lily whispered, looking at Margaret with something close to horror. "You met him at that networking event. You pushed me to date him. You planned the whole wedding. Did you know he was using me?" Margaret opened her mouth, closed, it opened it again. For once in her life, she had no practiced response ready. There was no love left to lose. I didn't call ahead. I didn't ask permission. I simply drove to my parents' house the morning after receiving my grandmother's will, the documents in a folder on my passenger seat, my resolve cold and steady. This conversation was 5 years overdue, and it would happen on my terms, not theirs. Margaret answered the door wearing yoga pants and a cashmere sweater, her hair styled, her makeup perfect. She looked radiant, healthy, the picture of wellness. Not a single sign of the stage 3 ovarian cancer she claimed to be battling. No pallor, no weakness, no physical indication of someone undergoing or preparing for chemotherapy. The woman collecting thousands of dollars in donations for her medical treatment looked better than I'd seen her in years. "Tara," she said, surprise flickering across her face. "I wasn't expecting you." I walked past her into the house without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk, now." She followed me into the dining room where I placed the folder on the table and pulled out my grandmother's will. I set it down carefully, the blue legal backing facing up Catherine's name and the date clearly visible. "Explain this," I said quietly. Margaret's face drained of color so quickly I thought she might faint. She stared at the document like it was something dangerous, something that might bite if she got too close. "Where did you get that?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "From Grandma's lawyer. The one who assumed you'd done your job as executor and distributed copies to all beneficiaries like you were legally required to do. The one who saw news coverage of the wedding disaster and realized you'd hidden this for 5 years. Tara, you don't understand." She reached for the document, but I pulled it back. Your grandmother, she was confused at the end. She wasn't thinking clearly. This will, it doesn't reflect what she really wanted. She wrote it 6 months before she died when she was perfectly lucid. It's notarized, witnessed, legally binding. And you know it is because you read it 5 years ago and decided to pretend it didn't exist. That house was supposed to be for the whole family. Margaret's voice was rising, desperation creeping in. Catherine didn't understand that decisions like that affect everyone. I was protecting the family unit, protecting you and Lily from unnecessary conflict. You were protecting yourself. I said, my voice hard. You were furious that she cut you out of the estate and explained exactly why. So you hid the will, lied about the house being family property, and spent 5 years acting like you had any claim to something that was never yours. My father appeared in the doorway, drawn by our raised voices. He looked older, grayer, diminished somehow since the wedding. He took in the scene, the will on the table, Margaret's panicked face. My rigid posture and something in his expression told me he knew exactly what was happening. Richard, I said, turning to face him. Did you know about this will? The question hung in the air for a long moment. My father looked at Margaret, then at me, then down at his shoes. Yes, he said finally. I knew. The admission shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow it still hurt. When? Your mother showed it to me the day after Catherine's funeral. She was upset about being excluded from the estate, about what Catherine had written about her. We talked about whether to tell you girls, and I thought maybe it was better to just let things be. Let it settle naturally without creating conflict. You advised her to hide it. I said not a question, but a statement. I advised her not to bring it up if it wasn't necessary, to avoid unnecessary family drama. Your mother was grieving, feeling rejected by her own mother. I was trying to help her process that without making things worse. You mean you were avoiding conflict like you've avoided every difficult moment your entire life? I heard my voice getting sharper, colder. You knew she was lying about the house. You knew when she planned Lily's wedding there without asking me. You knew, and you said nothing because speaking up would have required you to actually take a stand for once. I was trying to keep everyone happy, he said weakly. No, Dad. You were keeping yourself comfortable. There's a difference. Keeping peace would have meant stopping Mom from lying in the first place, from hiding a legal document, from violating her duties as executor. What you did was enable her to commit fraud while you stood by and watched, and now you're calling that peacekeeping. My phone rang, cutting through the tension. Lily's name flashed on the screen. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Tara. Her voice was wrecked, thick with tears. I need help. Ethan is gone. What do you mean, gone? He left. I haven't heard from him in 3 days. His phone is disconnected. I went to his apartment and it's empty. All his stuff is gone like he was never there. I don't know what to do. Mom won't talk to me. She's too angry about the wedding. Dad won't answer my calls. I don't have anyone else. I looked at Margaret, who was watching me with barely concealed fury, and then at Richard, who was staring at the floor. 5 years of lies, a lifetime of manipulation. And now my sister was falling apart, while our parents were more concerned with protecting their own images than helping their daughter. Come to Mom and Dad's house, I said into the phone. Right now. We need to talk, all of us. I hung up and looked at my mother. Lily's on her way. We're going to have a family meeting, and this time we're dealing in truth instead of performance. While we waited, I pulled out my phone and did something I probably should have done days ago. I searched for Ethan Cole on every social media platform, cross-referenced with the information I'd gathered about his fake credentials and financial problems. This time, I found what I'd missed before: a private Instagram account for someone named Sarah Chen. It took 15 minutes of searching through connections and mutual friends before I found a way to view her account through a friend of a friend's profile. And there it was, posted 6 days ago, a photo of Ethan and a beautiful Asian woman in her early 30s, both of them smiling at a restaurant, her hand displaying an engagement ring. The caption read, "Finally ready to announce our engagement, so excited to start this next chapter together." I scrolled back through her feed, photos of them together going back 6 months. Dinner dates, weekend trips, casual moments that looked far more genuine than anything I'd ever seen between Ethan and Lily. Sarah Chen had a verified account with over 50,000 followers, her bio describing her as a tech entrepreneur and founder of some startup I'd vaguely heard of. She was successful, wealthy, established everything Ethan had been looking for. He'd been playing both of them, keeping Sarah as his primary option while pursuing Lily as insurance. When the Whitman wedding imploded and became a viral disaster, when it became clear that marrying into our family would bring public humiliation rather than social advancement, he'd simply cut his losses and moved forward with the better prospect. Lily arrived 20 minutes later, her face swollen from crying, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt I recognized from high school. She looked at all of us standing in the dining room and seemed to shrink into herself. "He's engaged to someone else," I said, showing her my phone screen. "He has been for months. You were never his only option, Lily. You were his backup plan." She stared at the photo, and I watched something break in her expression, not just heartbreak, but recognition. She'd known something was wrong. She'd felt his distance, his disinterest, his performance of affection rather than genuine feeling. She'd just been too invested in the fairy tale to admit what she was seeing. "Mom knew," Lily whispered, looking at Margaret with something close to horror. "You met him at that networking event. You pushed me to date him. You planned the whole wedding. Did you know he was using me?" Margaret opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. For once in her life, she had no practiced response ready. There was no love left to lose. Lily arrived 20 minutes later, looking like someone who'd been hollowed out from the inside. No makeup, her hair unwashed and pulled into a messy ponytail, wearing sweatpants and an oversized college t-shirt I recognized from when we'd shared a room as teenagers. Her eyes were swollen, nearly shut from crying, her face blotchy and raw. She looked at the three of us standing in the dining room. Me with grandmother's will. Margaret pale and cornered. Richard retreating into his usual silence and seemed to shrink even smaller. "He's engaged to someone else," I said without preamble, turning my phone screen toward her. "Her name is Sarah Chen. She's a tech entrepreneur in San Francisco. They've been together for at least 8 months, probably longer. You were never his priority, Lily. You were his insurance policy." She took my phone with trembling hands and stared at the photo of Ethan and Sarah, the engagement announcement, the clear evidence of a relationship that predated and outlasted his time with her. I watched her face carefully, expecting shock or denial, but what I saw instead was something closer to recognition. "I knew," she whispered. "Not about her specifically, but I knew something was wrong. He was always distant, always on his phone, always somewhere else, even when he was sitting right next to me. When he kissed me, it felt like he was going through motions, like he was acting out what he thought a fiancé should do, rather than actually feeling anything." "Then why did you go through with the engagement?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because Mom said I was lucky. Because she kept telling me how perfect we were together, how successful he was, how this was exactly what I should want. And I thought maybe I was being ungrateful, you know? Maybe I was expecting too much, like some fairy tale romance, instead of being practical. It was easier to believe Mom was right than to admit I was about to marry someone who didn't actually love me." The confession hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift in my chest. For the first time in years, I wasn't seeing Lily as the golden child who'd received everything I'd been denied. I was seeing another woman who'd been shaped and manipulated by Margaret's need for control, just damaged in different ways. Lily set my phone down on the table and reached into the oversized tote bag she'd brought with her. "I found something," she said, her voice shaky. "Last week, when I thought Ethan and I were moving in together, I was cleaning out my apartment. Mom had stored some boxes at my place years ago, stuff from when she and Dad downsized. I was going through them trying to make space, and I found this." She pulled out a small leather-bound book, the kind with a brass clasp and pages edged in gold. A diary clearly old, the leather worn soft with handling. She held it out to me with both hands, as if it were something precious and dangerous at once. "It's Mom's diary from when we were teenagers. I think she forgot she'd stored it with those boxes. I started reading it, and Tara, you need to see what she wrote about us. I took the diary with a sense of foreboding. Margaret made a sound like she was about to object, but Lily cut her off with a look of such pure fury that our mother actually stepped back. Don't, Lily said, her voice harder than I'd ever heard it. Don't you dare try to explain this away. I opened the diary to a page marked with a receipt dated from 15 years ago when I was 20 and Lily was 15. Margaret's handwriting was immediately recognizable, neat and controlled. Lily is so easy to work with, the entry read. She believes everything I tell her and desperately wants my approval. I can shape her into exactly what I need her to be, the successful, beautiful daughter who makes me look good. She'll never question me the way Tara does. She's perfect, malleable material. I flipped forward a few pages, my hands shaking now. Tara is becoming a problem. She's too smart, too questioning, too stubborn to simply accept what I tell her. I need to break that independence early before she gets ideas about living a life I didn't plan for her. The key is making her feel guilty for wanting anything for herself. Make her believe that her desires are inherently selfish, that family obligation should always come first. Today I told her about Lily's art classes. I can see her wavering, see her wanting to say no, but she's not quite strong enough yet. She'll give in, she always does. Further in an entry from the week I'd earned my scholarship, Tara got into graduate school with full funding today. This is exactly what I was afraid of. She's becoming too independent, building a life I can't control. I need to stop this now. Lily needs money for her classes, perfect timing. I'll frame it as a family emergency, make Tara feel selfish for choosing her own future over her sister's needs. If she's working 2 jobs just to survive, she won't have energy to pull away from the family. She'll stay close, stay manageable, stay dependent on my approval. It's for the best. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking so hard the pages rattled. Lily reached over and turned to another entry, her face wet with tears. Started planning Lily's future today. This one read dated from just 2 years ago. She needs to marry well, someone who looks successful, who photographs well, who will elevate the family's social standing. That Ethan Cole could work. He presents well even if there are questions about his actual financial situation. Doesn't matter if Lily loves him or if he loves her. What matters is the wedding, the announcement, the photos in Coastal Elegance magazine. Lily will do whatever I suggest because she always has. She thinks I'm helping her. She doesn't understand that she's a tool I'm using to rehabilitate our reputation after Tara's embarrassing divorce. Lily was sobbing openly now, her whole body shaking. She never loved me, she choked out. All those years I thought I was special, thought I was her favorite, thought she actually cared about me more than you. But I wasn't her daughter. I was her doll, her project, her way of proving to the world that she was a good mother, even though she didn't actually love either of us. I set the diary down and pulled my sister into my arms. She collapsed against me, and I held her while she cried, my own tears finally coming. Not tears of anger or vindication, but grief for what we'd both lost. The mother we'd deserved, but never had the childhood that should have been filled with actual love instead of manipulation and control. We were both victims, I said quietly, stroking her hair the way I used to when we were little and she'd had nightmares. Just in different ways. You weren't the enemy, Lily. You were another casualty. She used you by making you think you were loved, and she used me by making me think I wasn't. Neither of us ever stood a chance. We sat like that for a long time, 2 sisters finally understanding that they'd been fighting the wrong battle, that the real enemy had never been each other, but the woman who'd pitted them against each other from birth. Margaret stood frozen by the table, her face a mask of horror at seeing her own words exposed, her calculations laid bare. Richard had sunk into a chair looking ancient and defeated. When Lily finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with the hem of her t-shirt, she looked at me with something like hope mixed with determination. What do we do now? Now, I said, we make sure she can't do this to anyone else. We make sure everyone knows exactly who she is, what she's done, what she's still doing. The fake cancer, the GoFundMe fraud, the hidden will, all of it. We stop protecting her reputation at the cost of our own sanity. I'm ready, Lily said. I'm done being her prop. I squeezed her hand, grateful to finally have an ally, someone who understood because she'd lived it too. We weren't whole yet, either of us, but we were on our way. But I still had one more truth to give her. A knock at the door broke the moment between Lily and me. Margaret moved to answer it, but I stood quickly, placing myself between her and the door. I'll get it, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I opened the door to find David standing on the porch, and for a moment I couldn't quite process what I was seeing. My ex-husband looked older than I remembered, more gray in his hairlines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago, but his eyes were the same, kind and steady and impossibly patient. He held a banker's box in his arms, the kind with a lid and handles clearly heavy with whatever it contained. "Tara," he said quietly. "I heard what happened. I came as soon as I could." "David, what are you doing here? Can I come in? I have something you need to see. Something I should have insisted you look at years ago, but you weren't ready then." He shifted the box slightly. "I think you're ready now." I stepped aside to let him enter. He walked into the dining room and stopped short when he saw the scene. Lily, red-eyed and shaking, Margaret, pale and trapped. Richard slumped in his chair, my grandmother's will and Margaret's diary spread across the table like evidence at a trial. "Jesus," David said softly, taking it all in. He set the box down on the table with a heavy thud. "I've been following the wedding disaster online. Saw it go viral, saw the videos, saw your mother's cancer announcement. That's when I knew I couldn't keep this to myself anymore." "Keep what to yourself?" I asked. "The evidence I collected during our marriage. Documentation of everything your mother did to try to destroy us." He looked at Margaret, and his expression was harder than I'd ever seen it. "You remember me, Margaret? The husband you tried to convince Tara to leave because I wasn't good enough for your family?" Margaret said nothing, but her face had gone from pale to ashen. David turned back to me. "When we divorced, I gave you all of this. Emails, recordings, documentation of years of interference. But you couldn't look at it. You said dealing with the end of the marriage was hard enough without knowing how deep her manipulation went. So I kept it. Backed it up in 3 different places, waited for the day you'd be strong enough to face it." He opened the box and began pulling out folders, each one labeled with dates and categories. "These are emails your mother sent to your employer over the course of 2 years. She was careful, always framed as concerned mother checking in. But look at the language." I picked up the first folder and read. The emails were addressed to my supervisor, to HR, sometimes to colleagues Margaret had met at company events. Each one was subtle poison wrapped in maternal concern. "I'm worried about Tara's emotional state lately. She's been under significant family stress, and I fear it might be affecting her work performance. Just wanted to let you know in case you notice any issues." Tara has always been somewhat fragile emotionally. I hope the pressure of her position isn't too much for her to handle. As her mother, I feel I should mention that Tara sometimes struggles with reliability when she's dealing with personal matters. Please be patient with her. Each email was calculated to plant seeds of doubt about my competence, my stability, my professionalism. I felt sick reading them, understanding how they might have influenced people's perception of me without ever being overt enough to constitute clear sabotage. "There's more," David said, pulling out a small digital recorder. "These are phone conversations between your mother and me. She called me regularly during our marriage, always when you were at work. At first I thought she was just being a concerned mother-in-law. Then I started recording them." He pressed play on the first one. Margaret's voice filled the room, warm and confidential. "David, I'm calling as Tara's mother because I'm worried about her. She's always been impulsive with money, makes poor financial decisions. I think it would be better if you handled the household finances entirely. She needs structure guidance, someone to protect her from her own bad judgment." Another recording, Margaret's voice more urgent this time. She's pulling away from the family, David. That's not healthy. A wife should prioritize her family of origin, maintain those connections. I think you need to encourage her to spend more time with us, maybe less time focused on her career. Work is making her selfish. The most damning recording came last. Margaret talking to someone else. Patricia, I recognized the voice while apparently unaware that David was in the next room with his phone recording. I need to make sure Tara's marriage fails, Margaret said, her voice cold and calculating. If she's too happy with David, too settled in her own life, she won't need me anymore. And I can't have that. She's my daughter. She belongs to our family, not his. I'll find a way to drive a wedge between them. It's not that hard. Just keep questioning his decisions. Make Tara doubt whether he really understands her. Remind her constantly that family should come first. Lily made a choking sound. I looked over to see her hand pressed against her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. You destroyed her marriage, Lily whispered, staring at our mother. You deliberately sabotaged it because you couldn't control her if she was happy. David nodded. I tried to tell Tara during the divorce. I gave her all of this, explained how much your mother had interfered, but she couldn't process it on top of everything else. She asked me to keep it said, maybe someday she'd be ready to look. I moved across the country for work, but I kept checking in on your family from a distance. When I saw what happened at the wedding, when I saw Margaret playing victim while collecting money for a cancer diagnosis, I'm betting she doesn't have, I knew it was time. I stood there holding years of evidence of my mother's systematic destruction of my marriage, my career, my sense of self, and felt something crystallize inside me. This wasn't just about the wedding anymore. This was about decades of calculated cruelty, of manipulation so deep and pervasive that it had cost me relationships, opportunities, years of my life spent doubting my own reality. I have evidence too, I said quietly. I walked to my bag and pulled out my laptop, opening the folder where I'd saved the recordings from the beach house. From the weeks before the wedding. Mom and Lily planning, discussing logistics, talking about me like I wasn't even a person with feelings or rights. I found the most damning recording and played it. Margaret's voice casual and dismissive. Don't worry about Tara's feelings. She's always been difficult and self-centered. This wedding is your moment to finally be the center of attention in this family. Let her sulk, she'll get over it. She always does. Lily stood abruptly and rushed from the room. I heard her in the bathroom, the sound of retching, of violent sickness. When she came back minutes later, her face was gray. You talked about me like that too, she said to Margaret, her voice hollow. All those years you told me I was special, that you loved me more, that I was your favorite. But it was all performance. You were just better at manipulating me because I was easier to control. Margaret tried to speak, but no words came out. She looked at the evidence spread across the table, the will, the diary, David's recordings, my audio files, and seemed to understand that there was no explanation, no charm, no manipulation that would work this time. Richard finally stood looking at his wife with something that might have been disgust, or might have been exhaustion. I think you should leave, Margaret. Let the girls talk. We've done enough damage. For once, my father was right. For once, we stood on the same side. The one more truth I had to give Lily was the recordings. The audio files I'd captured of Margaret and her speaking in my house, planning the wedding, discussing me like I was a problem to be managed, rather than a person to be respected. I played them for her that night at my apartment, and I watched her face crumble as she heard our mother's voice saying, Tara won't fight back. She never does. 3 days later, we returned to our parents' house. Not just Lily and me this time, but David too. My ex-husband had driven up from California when I'd called him, bringing the box of evidence he'd kept for years, documentation of Margaret's interference in our marriage, the emails she'd sent to my employers, the recorded phone calls where she'd tried to convince him I needed controlling. We stood on the front porch together, the three of us, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, supported, protected, not alone. Richard opened the door and his face went gray. He looked at me, then at Lily, then at David, and his shoulders sagged like a man who'd been holding up a crumbling ceiling and had finally let go. She's in the living room, he said quietly, stepping aside. Margaret was on the couch, her phone in her hand, probably managing her GoFundMe comments or responding to sympathy messages. She looked up as we entered, and I watched confusion flicker across her face before settling into defensive anger. "What is this?" she demanded. I set my folder on the coffee table and began laying out documents with the methodical precision of someone presenting evidence in court. The will first, with post-it notes marking the sections where Catherine had explained exactly why Margaret was excluded. The diary next opened to the most damning entries. Printed screenshots of the audio file transcripts Margaret's words preserved in black and white. David added his evidence emails, recordings, documentation of years of manipulation and sabotage. Finally, I placed 2 sheets of paper side by side, a screenshot of Margaret's GoFundMe page claiming she had stage 3 ovarian cancer, and a photo from her own Facebook posted the same week showing her at a wine tasting glass, raised, smiling broadly, the picture of health. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice calm and absolute. "You're going to shut down the GoFundMe today. You're going to refund every single donor with a public apology admitting you lied about having cancer. You're going to make a statement explaining that the beach house was never yours, that Grandma left it to me, and that I had every legal right to rent it when I chose to." Margaret opened her mouth to protest, but I kept talking my words, cutting through whatever excuse she'd been forming. "You're going to enter therapy with a licensed psychologist who specializes in narcissistic personality disorder, and you're going to actually do the work, or I will pursue legal charges. Wire fraud for the GoFundMe, theft for hiding the will and violating your duties as executor, defamation for every lie you've told about me publicly. I have lawyers ready to file. All I need to do is make one phone call. Most importantly," Lily added, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it, "you will have no contact with either of us unless we initiate it. You don't call, you don't text. You don't show up at our homes or workplaces. When and if we're ready to have a relationship with you, it will be on our terms, with our boundaries, following our rules. You don't get to control us anymore." "This is insane," Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You can't just dictate terms to your own mother." "I'm not your daughter anymore," I said. "I'm a woman you tried to manipulate for 35 years, who finally stopped letting you. Lily is done being your performing doll. We're done pretending this is normal family dysfunction instead of abuse. And if you test us, if you try to violate these boundaries or continue spreading lies, I will make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. Every piece of evidence here will be filed with the police, shared with your social circle, posted publicly. Your reputation, the one thing you valued above your own children, will be destroyed." Richard stood in the doorway, silent as always, but then he spoke. "She's right, Margaret. It's over." Margaret looked at him, betrayal flashing across her face, but he didn't back down. For the first time in my memory, my father was taking a stand, even if it came decades too late. And this time, no one dared stop me. Margaret posted her apology 2 days after our confrontation. I watched her Facebook page refresh with a statement that must have cost her everything she valued, an admission that she'd fabricated the cancer diagnosis, an apology to everyone who donated to her GoFundMe, and a commitment to refund every dollar. Within hours, the comments section filled with anger and betrayal. Former friends unfriended her publicly. Church committee members posted about removing her from volunteer positions. Invitations that had once filled her calendar simply stopped coming. The lifestyle magazine that had featured Lily's wedding ran a follow-up piece titled "The Unraveling of the Whitman Wedding" that detailed the property deception, the hidden will, and Margaret's pattern of manipulation. The article was shared thousands of times, dissected in online forums about narcissistic parents and family dysfunction. My mother had become a cautionary tale, her name synonymous with toxic family dynamics in our community. She'd lost the one thing she'd valued above her own daughters, her carefully curated social reputation. Lily surprised me by going public herself. She posted a video, no makeup, hair pulled back, sitting in her apartment, talking about what it meant to grow up as the golden child in a narcissistic family system. She spoke about realizing that favoritism wasn't love, that being the chosen one meant being the more useful tool. She apologized to me publicly for years of complicity for benefiting from a system that hurt me for not questioning our mother's narrative until it was almost too late. The video went viral in different circles than the wedding disaster had shared by therapists and support groups and people healing from similar family trauma. Lily started a blog she called Recovering from Golden Child Syndrome, and within weeks had thousands of followers sharing their own stories. But victory felt nothing like I'd imagined. I'd won every battle, exposed every lie, established every boundary, forced accountability where there'd been none, and yet I felt strangely empty. I'd lost my family of origin permanently. There would be no reconciliation, no future holidays together, no concept of home that included the people who'd raised me. Extended family members took sides, some supporting us, others calling us cruel for destroying Margaret so publicly. My father called occasionally, his voice heavy with apologies that sounded sincere but changed nothing. He still lived with Margaret, still chose her company, overtaking a real stand, still exemplified the passive complicity that had enabled everything. Lily and I met for coffee every week, building a relationship from scratch, learning to be sisters outside our mother's influence. But even that was complicated, tinged with grief for the relationship we might have had if we'd been raised by someone capable of actual love. We talked about holidays coming up, about how to handle family events, about the strange reality of being orphans with living parents. Justice and healing, I learned, are not the same thing. I'd gotten what I deserved, boundaries, respect, vindication, but it didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary, exhausting, and profoundly sad. Some nights I lay awake wondering if there had been another way, a gentler path that could have led here without the public destruction. But I knew the truth: with someone like Margaret, gentle boundaries weren't boundaries at all. They were just suggestions she'd ignore. But peace is never free. 3 months after the confrontation, I heard through a cousin that my parents had sold their house. The 4-bedroom colonial in the nice neighborhood, the one with the manicured lawn and the appearance of success, gone. They'd moved to a 2-bedroom condo in a town 30 miles away, somewhere none of their former friends would run into them at the grocery store or the dry cleaner. Margaret's social exile had cost Richard several business relationships, clients who didn't want to be associated with the scandal. Combined with expenses that had always exceeded their income, the financial consequences were inevitable. The cousin sent me a photo she'd seen on the real estate listing. My childhood home looked smaller in the pictures, ordinary in a way I'd never noticed when I lived there. I felt nothing looking at it. No nostalgia, no sadness. Just the mild interest you'd have for any house that used to mean something but doesn't anymore. Margaret sent emails, occasionally messages that would appear in my inbox before my filters caught them. I'd see the preview text before they disappeared into an archive I never opened. "Tara, I think we need to talk," or "I hope you'll reconsider," or "Your father and I have been thinking." Each one was a variation on the same theme, vague apologies that never quite acknowledged what she was apologizing for, defensive justifications mixed with requests for reconciliation on her terms. I changed my phone number and gave the new one only to Lily, to Marilyn, to the handful of friends who'd earned my trust. I blocked both my parents on every social media platform and set up email filters to automatically archive anything from their addresses. When my aunt called asking me to be the bigger person and reconcile for the sake of family unity, I sent her a text I'd composed with Marilyn's help. "I've forgiven them for my own peace, but forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. I'm not interested in rebuilding a relationship that was never healthy to begin with." Marilyn had told me something that stuck with me during one of our coffee meetings. "Some people never truly apologize. They never fully understand the harm they caused, and they certainly never change. You can spend your whole life waiting for closure that will never come, or you can create your own closure and move forward." So I did. On a Sunday morning in early December, I stood on the deck of my beach house with a cup of coffee, watching the winter ocean roll in under a pale sky. The house had been cleaned and restored after serving as a commercial film location, all traces of the wedding chaos erased. It was mine again in every sense, legally, physically, emotionally. No one could claim it, demand access to it, or treat it as communal property. The sanctuary I'd built had withstood the siege. I felt lighter standing there, but it wasn't the lightness of joy. It was the lightness that comes from setting down a burden you've carried so long you forgot it wasn't part of your body. I didn't miss my parents. That realization should have made me feel guilty or cruel, but instead it just felt honest. I could breathe without monitoring their moods, without bracing for criticism, without calculating how to avoid triggering their disappointment. The ocean breeze was cold against my face, carrying the salt smell of winter tides. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to earn love that was never going to be offered freely, trying to be good enough for people who'd never intended to see me as enough. I'd spent 35 years seeking their approval, and now I was indifferent to their opinion. Not angry, not hurt, just indifferent. And that indifference felt like freedom. But healing doesn't end with goodbye. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, Lily and I had built something new. We met every other week at a coffee shop halfway between our apartments, conversations that sometimes flowed easily and sometimes required effort, but were always honest in a way our relationship had never been before. We were learning each other as adults, discovering we actually enjoyed each other's company when we weren't performing roles our mother had assigned us. Lily had moved into a smaller apartment, one she could afford on the salary from her new job at a nonprofit arts organization. She'd started dating someone, a kind, funny man who taught high school English and made her laugh in a way Ethan never had. She'd stopped posting every moment on social media, stopped seeking validation from strangers, started living for experiences that didn't need documentation or approval. We'd probably never be best friends, the kind of sisters who talked every day or knew each other's deepest secrets. Too much history, too many years of being pitted against each other. But we were family in the way that actually mattered. We showed up, we told the truth, we respected each other's boundaries. On the 6-month anniversary of the disaster, I invited Marilyn to the beach house for sunset. We sat on the deck with glasses of wine, watching the sky transform into shades of purple and gold, the ocean reflecting the changing light like molten metal. "Do you regret it?" Marilyn asked, her voice gentle but direct. "Any of it?" I considered the question carefully, turning it over in my mind the way you'd examine something precious and fragile. I regret that it had to happen that way. I regret that my family was so profoundly broken that public humiliation was the only boundary they'd respect. But I don't regret protecting myself. And I don't regret showing Lily that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just control wearing a prettier mask. Marilyn nodded, satisfied with my answer. She told me about her own journey, how it had taken her years to stop feeling guilty for choosing herself over family obligation. "The hardest lesson," she said, "is understanding that you can love someone and still need to keep them out of your life. Those two things can both be true at the same time. Love doesn't obligate you to accept harm." As the sun dropped toward the horizon, I found myself reflecting on the entire arc of my life. I thought about the 8-year-old girl blamed for a vase she didn't break, the 12-year-old forced to sacrifice soccer for her sister's grades, the 15-year-old moved to a worse bedroom without being asked. I thought about the 22-year-old who gave up her scholarship because she'd been trained to believe her dreams were selfish. I thought about the woman who married and divorced, who bought this house as a fortress, who finally said no in a way that couldn't be ignored or negotiated away. The revenge had never really been about the wedding or even the house. It had been about proving to myself that my boundaries mattered, that my voice had power, that I was worth protecting, even when that protection cost me the only family I'd ever known. I'd been taught that being a good daughter meant erasing myself, and it had taken 35 years to unlearn that lie. The ocean moved in its eternal rhythm, waves rolling in and pulling back, constant and indifferent to human drama. Healing was like that too. I realized, not a destination you arrived at, but a process that ebbed and flowed, good days and hard days, progress and setbacks, always moving forward, even when it felt like standing still. I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. I didn't need to be understood by people who'd never really tried to see me. I just needed to keep choosing myself, one quiet decision at a time. They taught me that love without respect isn't family. I finally stopped being their daughter and started being myself. So that's my story. The wedding that never happened, the family that fell apart, and the boundaries I finally learned to set after 35 years of being taught that my needs didn't matter. Looking back now, I realize the beach house was never really about real estate or revenge. It was about learning that I had the right to say no, that my space was mine to protect, and that love without respect is just manipulation wearing a prettier name. Some of you might think I went too far, others might think I didn't go far enough, and that's okay. This was never about being right or wrong. It was about surviving a family system that was slowly suffocating me and finally choosing to breathe. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. I know this story is messy and complicated, and there are probably no clear heroes or villains, just people doing the best they could with the tools they had, or in my case, finally learning that sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family that felt impossible? Have you ever been the scapegoat or the golden child in your own family? Drop a comment below and let me know your story. Sometimes just knowing we're not alone in these experiences makes all the difference. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. I share stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and the messy journey of learning to choose yourself. Your support means everything. Until next time, remember, you don't owe anyone access to your peace.